If you like the story, you can support the author on Patreon. Link is in the description.
Chapter 1, Chapter 00, The Curtains of Destiny Open. You are dead. A very subtle way of saying that I am dead, thanks for letting me know. Adam thought as he looked at the slightly transparent blue square floating in front of him. His lips tightened with the direct manner of whoever was behind the message. He didn't need them to say he was dead to know that he was dead. You typically don't survive when your body is crushed by a truck to the point of turning into a liquid meat paste, decorating the wall with a sickly and foul-smelling crimson. You will reincarnate in another world. Good news, though still concerning. May I ask which world? Adam inquired, his voice carrying a hint of caution. A parallel reality in the universe of Harry Potter. I just hope it's not too worrisome. Adam said with a slightly nervous laugh. He felt that things wouldn't be as simple as a universe slightly different from what he watched and read in his past life. Please create your character. Select your name. Adam pondered for a moment and then moved. He typed on the holographic keyboard that appeared in front of him. Name, Asterion. Adam, or Asterion, admitted to loving the stars in the night sky a bit too much. Select your heritage. Muggle-born. Half-blood. Pure blood. Asterion didn't hesitate to choose the third option. Would anyone choose other options? Asterion didn't know, but he was a pragmatic individual. Being a pure blood would bring him many benefits in his next life, whether through inheritance, wealth, or knowledge accumulated over hundreds or thousands of years, depending on the family in question. Did being a pure blood come with disadvantages? Yes, it had its drawbacks, but life had always been that way. You gain something and lose something in return. The wheel of fate has always turned like that. Asterion wasn't a child who had never seen the world. Society had dealt him many blows. This made him realize that the world wasn't a rainbow. It was cold and cruel, especially for an orphan like him. Pure blood selected. Choose your parents' lineage. Asterion looked at the long list in front of him in surprise. There were thousands of houses. Some he recognized, such as Malfoy, Greengrass, Black, Abbott, Avery, Bulstrode, Yaxley, and so on. Asterion ignored the Weasley house. There was no way he would choose such an option. Being poor was out of the question in his next life. He had already suffered enough. He wasn't masochistic enough to choose the oldest and poorest house in the wizarding world. There were also noble houses from other countries, such as Delacour, Flamel, Solomon, Romanov, Rasputin, and so on. After much deliberation, Asterion chose the most ancient and noblest house of Black as his paternal lineage, and on his mother's side, he chose the most ancient and noblest house of Slytherin. His choices were not based on mere momentary decisions. Being a member of the House of Black would bring him knowledge accumulated over millennia by the Black family, prestige, and political power in Great Britain as one of the most powerful houses in the country. Being a Slytherin only reinforced the aforementioned advantages, making him even wealthier and politically powerful. Both choices complemented each other, overlaying all the qualities of both houses. Choices completed. Name, Asterion Black Slytherin. Age, 0, 14. Gender, male. Family, Black, deceased father, Slytherin, deceased mother. Asterion couldn't help but feel pleased with his status, although the part about his deceased parents left a lasting bitter taste in his mouth. He would be lying if he said he didn't want a family. Suddenly, while his gaze remained focused on the main status screen, his attention was diverted to another screen that read, Generating Inherent Curse Technique. Asterion was surprised and couldn't help but want to swear out loud. The world he was being reborn into was a mix of Harry Potter and Jujutsu Kaisen. Taking a deep breath to calm his undead heart, Asterion looked at the experience bar growing gradually with a growing sense of anticipation in his chest. 0%. 5%. 15%. Now, this practically changes everything. While before the world of Harry Potter was based on heritage and a bit of talent, there was still hope for Muggle-born wizards to rise in the Wizarding Society. But now, with this change, having hope would be a challenging thing to achieve in this world where negative emotions turn into man-devouring monsters. Asterion couldn't help but be thankful for choosing to be a pure blood in this cursed world. At least he would inherit one of the inherent curse techniques from one of the houses he chose, be it Black or Slytherin he didn't mind. 57%. 62%. 87%. He supposed that to endure for millennia in this world full of madness, killing, and horror, a family must be strong, or it would be destroyed over the centuries, let alone survive for millennia. 90%, 95%, 96%, 97%, 98%, 99%, 100%. Inherent technique successfully generated. Creation and manipulation of cursed spirits. Description: as the name suggests, the technique allows for the creation and control of cursed spirits. The curses created or mastered are absorbed into small black orbs that the host must orally ingest to use. If the grade difference is more than 2 levels, the host can absorb a curse without consequences. Asterion couldn't help but release a tired sigh, his body relaxed completely, and he let out a low laugh, a technique that suited the Black House quite well. Although he couldn't help but notice similarities with Suguru-Getu's innate technique, there were obvious differences between the two techniques. Name: Asterion Black Slytherin. Age: 0, 14. Gender: male. Family: Black, deceased father, Slytherin, deceased mother. Inherent technique: creation and manipulation of cursed spirits. Character creation successfully completed. Initiating rebirth process. May your journey begin, Asterion Black Slytherin. Before Asterion could say or do anything, darkness fell over his eyes. Chapter 2, Chapter 01, The Curtains of Destiny Open. March 4, 1990. England, London. St. Mary Orphanage. In the dimness of the night, the pale moon in the starry sky emitted its glow through the window. Gentle footsteps echoed in the long corridor of the orphanage, when suddenly a figure passed in front of a window. Hair as black as a raven's feathers and a pair of eyes resembling beautiful rubies, extraordinary and bright. Asterion glanced at the moon in the dark sky with an indifferent gaze and continued walking down the orphanage corridor. His steps continued until a door blocked his path. Approaching the padlock securing the door, the 9-year-old boy gently moved his slender fingers near the padlock, and as if by magic, the lock opened with a soft clicking sound. Crossing the door and then closing it, Asterion walked along the stone path to the entrance and jumped lightly over the pointed metal fence that surrounded the environment of the old 20th century building. He landed gracefully with the tips of his toes on the other side of the fence. Now, walking alone through the illuminated streets of London, Asterion couldn't help but reflect on his new life in this world. When he awakened the memories of his past life, he was a 5-year-old boy living in St. Mary Orphanage in London, a delicate-looking boy with a quiet and serene temperament. Then, on that same day, he saw for the first time the monsters that plagued this world. It looked like a grotesque red caterpillar with a mouth covered in hundreds of teeth and a long, disgusting tongue. The creature hovered over the shoulder of the orphanage's headmistress, Mrs. Morgan, seemingly causing pain in the shoulders and back of the gentle 50-year-old woman. Asterion naturally exorcised the cursed spirit. It wasn't difficult. The cursed spirit was lamentably weak, even with poor control over its magical energy. He managed to exorcise the monster with just a release of the dark blue energy against the creature, causing it to explode instantly. But to his surprise, the next day, he had encountered other cursed spirits in the orphanage. Naturally, he exorcised them, and the cycle continued for 3 days until he realized he was in an orphanage full of children who would likely never be adopted. Fear, anger, resentment, hatred. The orphanage was a breeding ground creating cursed spirits every day. An endless cycle of hatred. Asterion felt helpless about it. He couldn't solve the orphanage's situation. He couldn't simply make all the orphans get adopted or become happy with their miserable lives. The only thing he could help with was dealing with the cursed spirits. It was then that he used, for the first time, his innate technique: creation and manipulation of cursed spirits. He created a cursed spirit whose sole mission was to kill all the other cursed spirits generated in the orphanage. In the following week, he expanded its reach to cover the entire street. With the issue of cursed spirits resolved in the orphanage, Asterion did what anyone would do in a dangerous world: he trained. He trained to the point of exhaustion, whether using his innate technique or manipulating his magical energy. When he wasn't training, he was sleeping, resting from the exhaustive regimen of his training. But there was one thing he never got used to, and he wholeheartedly agreed with Suguru-Getu. The taste of a cursed spirit was incomparably disgusting. It was like eating a cloth soaked in vomit, feces, and any disgusting thing you could imagine. The first time Asterion swallowed a cursed orb, he vomited so much that blood had mixed with his saliva, as there was nothing in his stomach but saliva at that moment. After that experience, he was only able to swallow another cursed orb the following week. Naturally he vomited again, though a bit less than the first time. It took 6 long and exhausting months until he could swallow a cursed orb without vomiting. Asterion assumed that a 40-year-old prostitute, despite her years of experience, might not have as much expertise in using her own throat without vomiting as he did. A somewhat unpleasant realization for him. The training left some scars on his mind, whether due to his innate technique or his rigorous regimen. Combined with the fact that he was isolated in the orphanage, Asterion became more indifferent to his own feelings. Time passed, and 3 years and 6 months had gone by. 9-year-old Asterion was now ready to truly create a second powerful cursed spirit that would grow with him in this messed-up world. Facing the gates of the empty school, Asterion easily leaped over the wall and landed on the ground with his hands in his pants pockets. He lifted his head and gazed at the enormous building with his serene and icy eyes. To any normal person, the school appeared perfectly normal, with nothing out of the ordinary, but in Asterion's eyes, remnants of negative magical energy were scattered everywhere. It was a miracle that a powerful cursed spirit had not emerged in the school. Hospitals, schools, cemeteries, and any place with a large number of people generated a significant amount of negative magical energy, which in turn formed cursed spirits. It was like an endless cycle of hatred and resentment. This school was one of Asterion's targets for today's operation. Walking through the empty corridors of the school, only his footsteps echoed in the particularly silent environment. Asterion could feel it, the cold atmosphere hanging in the air, the greedy, cold, and sadistic gaze lurking in the shadows. It wasn't powerful, he estimated grade 3 or semi-grade 3. He could kill with a wave of his hand and paid no mind to the ant lurking in the shadows. Reaching the center of the school, where the negative magical energy was strongest, the cafeteria. Asterion stopped and extended his arm forward. He began using his innate technique, creation and manipulation of cursed spirits. The dark blue energy quickly began to mobilize throughout the entire school, converging in one place, the cafeteria. When a substantial amount of negative magical energy gathered in one spot, blue lights began to flicker around. Asterion's hair gently fluttered alongside the blue sparks, floating like fire sparks in the air. Interestingly, unlike the innate technique, which could be easily used as an extension of a limb, magical energy was different, you had to learn to control it. The control of one's magical energy reflected in the innate technique. For example, it was like plugging a 120 Hz device into a 240 Hz socket. Naturally, the device would fry due to the high voltage. The innate technique operated similarly. If you couldn't control your magical energy, what would be created was a monster entirely different from what you envisioned during the creation of the cursed spirit. It often turned into an amoeba without any distinctive features, power, or personality. Translated by AI. Chapter 3, Chapter 02, The Curtains of Destiny Open. Creating a cursed spirit was akin to composing a song with melodies that emerged from the 9 hells of Satan. Asterion moved his hands as if playing a dark and malevolent melody, cold and malicious musical notes, while manipulating his fingers in the dark and mysterious ripples of negative magical energy. Relentlessly, he forced his intentions and desires into the core of the cursed spirit's being, shaping its personality and consciousness. This was crucial for a cursed spirit to evolve smoothly in the future. In this cursed spirit, he specifically infused his desires and yearnings to control the weather, storms, and soar freely in the sky. He was crafting a powerful melody that seemed to resonate with the boundless power of the heavens, a ruler cold, arrogant, and relentless, almost a god in the truest sense of the word. However, instead of a deity revered in the annals of human history, what he was creating was something dirty and unholy, a demon king. While Asterion was fully immersed in creating his second masterpiece, the lurking being deemed it an opportune time to reveal itself. It walked on the ceiling with 4 legs sporting extremely long claws. Its skin was wrinkled and green, its face covered by dirty, black, and unkempt hair. The visage resembled that of a horse's long snout, and its sickly yellow eyes were fixed on the figure standing in the center of the dining hall. It was a cursed spirit. An insatiable greed and a sadistic, arrogant gaze reflected in its yellow pupils. The cursed spirit advanced, walking on the ceiling, its gaze unwavering from the figure, emitting an extremely alluring scent. As it approached the figure standing in the dining hall, the delightful aroma intensified. Its long and repulsive tongue emerged from its mouth, while foul saliva dripped from the smooth and viscous organ. Coming close enough, the quadruped cursed spirit couldn't wait any longer and leaped towards Asterion. Its figure could be seen as a fleeting shadow in the air, challenging for a normal human to even catch a glimpse of the creature's shadow. However, not for the guardian that faithfully protected its master and king. Asterion's shadow moved violently, revealing a gigantic dog's head with hundreds of red eyes. It appeared and swallowed the cursed spirit whole while it was still in mid-air. A moment. That was the time it took to manifest and devour the cursed spirit. With teeth the size of daggers, the enormous head chewed on the cursed spirit delightfully while emitting a cold and sadistic laughter. As it finished its meal, the massive head gradually retreated back into the shadow of its master, eagerly awaiting his sacred call. Asterion remained oblivious throughout the entire attack process. He was pouring all of himself into creating his second masterpiece, and even if he were aware of the attack, he would remain indifferent. Baskerville was his first masterpiece, created exclusively to protect him from all possible dangers. It possessed the innate technique to devour anything, whether physical, energetic, or even immaterial, such as concepts. It was the perfect guardian created solely for protection. When the sun rose on the horizon, bathing the world in its warm rays, dispelling the darkness and cold of the night, it was the moment Asterion finished creating his creation. Pale, exhausted, and trembling, Asterion sat on a bench at one of the tables in the dining hall. Despite being completely drained, there was a look of joy in his beautiful dark red eyes. The creation process took longer than expected, his magical energy was severely depleted, and his body screamed with pain. However, the feeling of satisfaction in his chest could not be surpassed. All the pain he felt, all the exhaustion he endured, was worth it when he looked at the cursed orb in his hands. Unlike the usual blue cursed orbs, the one in his hands was red, a deep crimson red. Staring at the red orb in his hand, Asterion narrowed his eyes and let out a low laugh. His laughter carried relief, joy, and an unparalleled satisfaction. Without any hesitation, he raised his head and opened his mouth, swallowing the crimson orb. The taste was still the same, terribly awful and repugnant, but it was all worth it in the face of the power he would command. Closing his eyes, Asterion felt the newly forged connection and opened them a few seconds later. Nidhogg! He whispered. Instantly, a massive black curtain made of a dense black liquid substance unfolded behind him. Through the black curtain, 6 pairs of red eyes could be seen, all fixated on Asterion. In those gigantic eyes, there was both reverence and tyranny. Feeling Nidhogg's emotions, Asterion laughed. The dragon was so arrogant that even with complete control over him, Asterion sensed pride and tyranny in Nidhogg, as if it conveyed, "Don't command me to face weak enemies." The crimson dragon of domination, Nidhogg, had its own personality, much like the devil hound, Baskerville, who was sarcastic, sadistic, and cruel. Whether it was the cruel Baskerville or the arrogant Nidhogg, Asterion could summon them without caring about what both cursed spirits thought. Dispersing the black curtain behind him, Asterion stood up after regaining some physical strength and looked around the dining hall in silence before murmuring to himself, "Let's go home." Asterion, who had just jumped over the school wall, landed on the ground and shielded his eyes from the glaring sunlight with his hand. Getting accustomed to the sun, he withdrew his hand and walked through the streets of London, which gradually came to life as time passed. People strolled to their jobs, oblivious to the dangerous world surrounding them. In this cruel world, normal people were nothing more than cattle for cursed spirits. Asterion glanced at the crowd of people coming and going. "Ignorance is a blessing for the weak," he muttered as he walked through the people, thinking that he would never be like them weak. As he walked, he delved into his own thoughts. The world was changing, more precisely, the cursed spirits were changing, growing stronger with each passing year. He noticed this change in the second year after awakening his past life's memories. Once a grade 4 cursed spirit with 1 unit of energy, now it possessed 3 and was increasing every year. On a smaller scale, it might seem insignificant, but cursed spirits from grade 2 to special grade would have 3 to 4 times the power they would normally have. He could even imagine how chaotic the world was becoming because of this. Asterion didn't know if it was him who was unsettling the world or, as he imagined, the current bearer of the 6 eyes. "It's no use dwelling on any of this, just get stronger to protect yourself from what lies ahead," he muttered, looking at the crowd of people around him. Suddenly, he stopped and looked to his left, swearing he saw a strand of white hair disappearing not far from him. "What a crazy world," Asterion murmured to himself, gradually fading into the crowd. Translated by AI. Chapter 4, Chapter 03, A World in Darkness. April 1, 1990. England, London. Heavy rain covered the entire city of London. Asterion stood before a dark alley, a stream of water flowed from the alley carrying a thin red flow that emptied into the street sewer. Entering the alley, only the sound of his wet footsteps hung in the air, the smell of rain masking the foul scent of blood and garbage around. A shopping bag was randomly thrown on the ground along with the daily groceries from a day of shopping. The walls, slippery with moss, were stained with a sickly shade of red. The disgusting sound of chewing was carried through the air amidst the sound of falling rain. Asterian's red eyes fell upon the dark creature devouring a corpse at the end of the alley. He murmured as he reached out his arm towards the creature, "Exorcise." A blue glow bloomed in the dark surroundings, forming a large blue sphere. In the next instant, the cursed spirit that was still devouring the corpse began to decompose into a blue radiance, transforming into a completely blue orb in Asterian's hand. Disgusting! Swallowing the cursed orb, Asterian murmured as he walked towards the corpse, stepping into puddles of water contaminated with blood. From the figure of the corpse, it was a woman. He crouched down beside the corpse and gently moved the long, wet brown hair sticking to the young woman's face, and then, he saw a woman around 20 years old, very beautiful, with lovely freckles on both cheeks. So young. Asterian's eyes darkened slightly. He wasn't a sociopathic killer without emotions. He felt a sense of sorrow for the young woman lying on the cold, wet ground of the alley. She had a whole life ahead of her but died in this dirty alley. Caressing the cold, lifeless face, he couldn't help but think that one day he would die like her, alone and without anyone around. Closing the still open eyes of the young woman, Asterian looked at her and whispered gently, "Miss, I don't know your name or if you believe in any gods, but I hope you have found peace in death." He stood up and left the alley, leaving the young woman who appeared to be peacefully sleeping at the end of the alley. As for the body, he wouldn't destroy it. If she had any family, they would want to bury their daughter. It was the least he could do. Sitting on top of a building, Asterian deeply reflected on the world he was in. It was cruel and cold, without any distinction of race, class, or power. Death was so common in his everyday life that the young Asterian couldn't help but be alarmed by his own feelings. It was as if he treated death as something commonplace. "What a messed up world," he murmured, looking at the rain bathing the city. It seemed as if God had sent the rain to cleanse this dirty world. Asterian closed his eyes and removed the magical energy cloak that covered him, allowing the rain to wash away, or at least attempt to purify, the dirt on him. Suddenly, he opened his eyes and looked at a desperate man seeking help from passers-by and neighbors. A crowd began to gather around the man. The man entered the house again, while some men followed him with nervous and panicked expressions. It didn't take long for the desperate man to come out again, but this time, he was in complete silence. Lifeless eyes as he carried a small body in his arms, a girl, perhaps around 8 years old. Wet blonde hair clung to her pale face, she appeared as if she were merely sleeping and would wake up at any moment. Unfortunately, the grotesque twist in the girl's neck told a different story. Narrowing his eyes, a cold and fleeting glint passed through Asterian's eyes. The girl exuded a faint residue of magical energy. He clenched his fists tightly while gritting his teeth. It was a cursed spirit that had killed the girl, who probably had recently awakened her own magical energy. It was a phenomenon he had discovered: when a child awakened their magical energy, cursed spirits were drawn to the magical energy emitted by that particular child. Asterian berated himself a bit for not having the 6 eyes at this moment. He could have noticed given the current distance between him and the girl's house. Taking a deep breath and then exhaling the air from his lungs, Asterian calmed himself as he regained control over his emotions. "In the end, I don't even know why I'm dwelling on this so much, maybe because I've seen too much death recently." He dried the water on his clothes and covered himself again with the cloak of magical energy. Giving one last glance at the child who seemed to be sleeping peacefully in her father's arms, he leaped from building to building while a thought crossed his mind. Can I create a cursed spirit capable of devouring all magical energy in the world? 29 April 1990. Since he had that momentary thought, Asterian tried and tried, but he discovered that it was impossible to create a cursed spirit capable of devouring all magical energy in the world. He encountered 2 main limitations that prevented him from succeeding. The first limitation was the amount of magical energy he had. No matter how absurdly large his magical energy reserves were, it was a drop in the ocean compared to the vast amount required to create something so grandiose. This was because, to create something powerful, you needed an equally powerful energy source. It was a basic principle of the laws of physics. The second limitation was his own body, which wouldn't withstand such an exhaustive process. Even the mere attempt would cause his body to collapse instantly. This made his idea of creating a cursed spirit capable of purifying this world entirely futile. Lying on the bed in the orphanage, Asterian stared at the ceiling in silence. I need to start systematically learning the knowledge of this world and stop trying to understand everything blindly. The knowledge of the Black House should help. There were many things he hadn't learned because of being alone and without knowledge, whether it was barriers or domain expansion, he possessed none. However, Asterion hesitated. He didn't want to approach the wizarding world until he could gain the power to protect himself. Specifically, he sought the power of a special grade sorcerer. Also, he didn't know how the Ministry of Magic or any other organization would react if they became aware of his existence. The life experience of Gojo Satoru was still on his mind. Currently, he was 9 years old and was likely a grade 1 sorcerer, bordering on the power of a semi-special grade sorcerer. If he combined the 334 cursed spirits he possessed, he was a semi-special grade sorcerer. As for this small number of cursed spirits, Asterion was still defenseless. He wasn't omnipotent, he had to focus on training or hunting cursed spirits. In the end, he chose to train and hunt only in the spare hours he had throughout the years. Try summoning a house elf connected to the Black House. If that fails, I must discreetly infiltrate Diagon Alley. Releasing a sigh, Asterion closed his eyes and fell asleep. The weight of his experiments was beginning to take its toll. Translated by IA. Chapter 5, Chapter 04 The Young Heir of House Black. Arcturus Black III couldn't help but feel that fate was cruel to his family. Their prestigious and noble house was on the brink of extinction, with the only eligible heir to inherit the patriarchal mantle being the son of his elegant great-niece, Narcissa. To his dismay, a haughty and spoiled young boy, who dared not practice the simplified inherited technique of the Black House, had the audacity to claim the noble throne of the Blacks. Even if he were to die, Arcturus would prefer to destroy the entire Black House than see the Malfoy boy inherit it. He wouldn't have the courage to face his ancestors in the afterlife if he allowed a boy who didn't even practice the simplified inherited technique to inherit the patriarchal mantle. So, as if Merlin had heard his prayers, the Black family's house elf, Kriaker, came into his presence, claiming to have heard a call from a member of the Black family summoning him. And it wasn't the 3 daughters of Cygnus. Arcturus' face, which had always remained cold and indifferent for most of his life, broke into a smile like never before. However, upon learning about the 9-year-old boy with eyes as red as rubies, he laughed, releasing a loud and hearty laughter. Eyes as red as rubies. How those words were music to Arcturus' ears. The reason Arcturus was so excited was that red held a special significance for the Black family, as it was the same color of eyes as their ancestor, whose name was Corvinus Black. The red eyes, or the eyes of the heart, were a rare mutation that appeared in a member of the Black family once every few centuries. This mutation would only occur if someone inherited the inherited technique of the Black House, creation and manipulation of cursed spirits. This wasn't the weakened version that he and other family members used, but rather the same innate technique that their ancestors had employed for over 1,000 years to consolidate the unparalleled prestige of the Black family as one of the most powerful on the entire planet. Arcturus was in complete happiness. Even at almost 90 years old, having survived 2 magical wars, and nearly dying countless times at the hands of cursed spirits, Arcturus only wanted to scream to express the excitement welling up infinitely in his chest. Fortunately, he managed to maintain his composure. After all, he hadn't lived so long without being able to control his own emotions. "Take me to the boy, Kriaker!" Arcturus exclaimed, his voice resonating through the Black Manor. "Yes, Lord Black. As you command, Lord Black." Kriaker responded, gripping his large ears so tightly it seemed they could detach from his head. He displayed a happiness that rivaled Arcturus' own. As he observed the imposing structure of the orphanage before him, Arcturus furrowed his brow, silently expressing a hope that his potential great-grandson wouldn't fall victim to shyness or low self-esteem due to his upbringing. If that were the case, he pledged to mold the young one into a true noble in every sense of the word. It was inconceivable that the future heir of the House Black would possess any trace of shyness or insecurity in the presence of other noble houses. Holding his cane, adorned with the Black family crest sculpted onto it, a raven with wings spread wide, Arcturus walked the stone path until he stood in front of a door. With determination, he grasped the iron doorbell in a circular shape and rang it 3 times, producing a resonant sound that echoed through the surroundings. The door opened in response, revealing a woman of approximately 50 years, her graying hair arranged in an elegant bun. She wore a kindly expression, with a welcoming smile on her lips. "How may I assist you, Your Excellency?" Gazing carefully at the elderly man, impeccably dressed in a noble black suit adorned with silver threads, Isabel Morgan, the respected headmistress of the orphanage, inquired with a voice that carried a note of prudence. Good afternoon, ma'am. Arcturus removed his hat and elegantly placed it over his chest as he bowed gracefully. I am Arcturus Black 3. I hope you forgive the unexpected, unannounced visit, but I have important matters concerning your orphanage. Isabel couldn't help but feel surprised, not only by the gentlemanly manners of the nobleman but also by the name itself. He shared the same surname as the young Asterian in her orphanage. It didn't take much insight to realize there was some relation between the two. After all, Black was not a common surname in England. With a kind smile, Isabel opened the door and gestured invitingly for Arcturus to enter. It's not a bother, Mr. Black. Please come in, and I will arrange for some tea while we discuss our matters. Inside the headmistress's office, Arcturus found himself seated while being served a cup of tea by the esteemed leader of the orphanage. After serving him, she settled into the chair across from him, casting a penetrating look with her almost black, deep brown eyes, emanating seriousness. I presume your excellency has come in search of young Asterian, the headmistress expressed, her voice deep and her gaze incisive. Certainly, Mrs. Morgan. Could you enlighten me about him? Inquired Arcturus, his voice raspy, marked by the passage of time, carrying a hint of anxiety. Perhaps sensing this, the headmistress smiled gently, addressing the elderly man calmly as she sipped her tea. Asterian has always been a boy of calm and serene nature, offering his help readily, without ever complaining or shedding tears. He excelled in private lessons, securing the top position in all tests. However, the headmistress paused briefly, seemingly hesitant for some reason, but continued under the unwavering gaze of the man. He changed at the age of 6. Although he continued to perform his tasks impeccably, he distanced himself from the other children and spent long hours in his room. I would say that over time, he became progressively more distant and cold. Arcturus listened attentively, fearing to miss any detail. Upon hearing about the young boy's qualities, especially his academic achievements, he nodded with satisfaction, increasingly pleased with the prospect of Asterian as his future heir. Regarding the account of the boy becoming progressively more distant and cold, Arcturus presumed that the boy awakened his magical energy at the age of 6 and began to use and experiment with it, including his inherited technique. Why did he think so? The moment Arcturus entered the orphanage, he detected numerous cursed spirits, some for surveillance and others for attacks. The boy had wasted no time when it came to security. Translated by AI. Chapter 6, Chapter 05, The Young Heir of House Black. Observing the man's atypical reaction, Isabel inquired with a stern voice tinged with anger, "You don't seem concerned about his condition, Mr. Black." Arcturus' indifference to Asterian's well-being truly infuriated the orphanage headmistress. Having devoted her entire life to caring for children, she particularly despised those who ignored a child's pain. Arcturus coldly gazed at the woman, who concealed her anger behind a stoic facade. He held the cup and slowly tasted the tea. "When you wear the crown, you must bear its weight," the indifferent voice lingered in the office air. He looked up, directly into the woman's eyes, and continued speaking slowly. Asterian chose to live with a true black, he placed the crown, now he must bear the weight that comes with it. Isabel's eyes seemed frozen as she heard his words. "What weight should a 9-year-old child bear, Mr. Black?" Her kind voice transformed into a harsh and cold tone. "That's no longer something that concerns you, Mrs. Morgan." He paused for a moment, looked at the woman, and continued, "If you'll allow me, I want to meet my great-grandson now." He finished by placing the teacup on the table. Isabel took a deep breath, restraining herself from shouting and expelling the man from the orphanage. However, she knew she couldn't, the man in front of her had complete rights over Asterian as the likely guardian of the boy. "Please follow me, Mr. Black," she said, rising from her chair. Arcturus ignored the woman's cold tone. Like a muggle, she would never understand the weight a wizard carried. He wasn't deemed noble merely by birth, he was regarded as noble for shedding blood and sweat for the country he loved. For over 7 decades, he pressed on, engaging in an unyielding battle against the darkness, teetering on the brink of death numerous times. Survival in some instances was just a stroke of luck. Relentless, he advanced, oblivious to the countless scars etched onto his body during years of tireless struggle. Isabel accompanied Arcturus to the first floor of the building, where they finally stopped in front of a door. Knocking on the door, Isabel spoke in a gentle tone, quite different from the tone she had used with Arcturus earlier. "Asterian, you have a visitor. May I come in for a moment?" "Come in, it's open," a low voice responded from behind the door, fatigue audible in his tone. As Isabel was about to enter, she couldn't proceed as Arcturus had stopped her. "Mrs. Morgan, I wish to speak with my great-grandson alone." "That's impossible." As she was about to continue, she saw Arcturus draw a beautiful wand and gesture in her direction. "You don't need to worry, Mrs. Morgan. You can return to the office to prepare the necessary paperwork for Asterian's departure," he said with a stern tone, devoid of any emotion on his face. "Yes, I'll be in the office if you need anything," Isabel said, showing a gentle smile as she headed to her own office. Putting his wand back into the holster on his arm, Arcturus smoothed out the wrinkles in his clothes. Then, he gripped the doorknob and opened the door. The door swung open, revealing an impeccably clean and tidy room. Nothing extravagant, just a bed, a wardrobe, an old lamp on top of an even older desk. So, Arcturus saw him, sitting in the chair in front of the desk, writing with full concentration on a piece of paper. Honestly, he thought that upon seeing the boy, he would recognize whether he was the son of Sirius or Regulus, but looking at his face, Arcturus had to admit that the boy bore no resemblance to his grandchildren. Delicate and refined facial features, smooth black hair, and vibrant red eyes like two shining rubies. If there was anything indicating his paternal origin, it was the straight black hair, a trait inherited from Regulus, as Sirius had darker brown, more curly hair. Arcturus focused on the red eyes and let out a low laugh. Even though he knew the information beforehand, seeing it for himself brought him immense joy. He could envision the House of Black once again rising to the top among all noble houses. He would ensure this happened before embracing death, satisfied in knowing he left a worthy heir in the world. "Hello, Asterian," Arcturus said with his raspy, aged voice. His black eyes stared at his great-grandson with a content look. In terms of appearance, he had nothing to worry about. The boy, even without knowledge of his heritage, sat upright and with dignity. He saw the boy stop writing and place the pen on the desk while looking him up and down. "A relative of mine, I presume," said the boy, his melodic and serene voice resonating in the particularly quiet room. "You presumed correctly, my dear grandson," Arcturus laughed at the boy's intelligence as he calmly sat on the bed while introducing himself. "I am Arcturus Black III, your father's grandfather and the current patriarch of the oldest and noble House of Black. Also, I am a semi-special grade wizard at the British Ministry of Magic." "Asterian Black, orphan and heir to nothing at the moment," Asterian said in a louder than usual tone with a humorous inflection. Arcturus laughed, enjoying the cheeky and bold attitude of the boy. "I suppose you have questions, Asterian," Arcturus said, changing the atmosphere in the room. "Yes, I have many unanswered questions, but for now, I'd like to know if my parents are still alive." Asterian looked at the elderly man sitting on his bed with a complex expression. He wanted to know who his parents were, and if they were indeed dead, he would avenge them. The least he could do for the people who brought him into this world. "The truth is, I also don't know whose son you are." Arcturus looked at the still indifferent boy and continued, "If you are the son of my grandson, Regulus, then he's dead, killed by the Dark Lord, Voldemort. If you are the son of my other grandson, Sirius, he's currently imprisoned for blowing up an entire street, killing thousands of people in the process. No other options?" Asterian asked again after learning the fate of his potential father. Although there were some differences from what he knew, they were irrelevant at the moment. "No, according to your date of birth, you are the son of Regulus or Sirius," Arcturus shook his head and answered honestly. After learning about the boy's existence, he himself determined the boy's paternal origins. He was the son of Regulus or Sirius, there was no other option. "I am the son of Regulus," Asterian spoke, causing the room to fall into complete silence. The boy's response made Arcturus look closely at him with an extremely serious expression. Translated by AI. Chapter 7, Chapter 06, The Young Heir of House Black. The silence hung in the air, both exchanging a gaze in complete quietness. Arcturus was the first to break the silence between them. "So, how do you know you're Regulus' son?" His penetrating gaze fixed on the boy's eyes. Besides the boy knowing who his father was, there was something Arcturus had overlooked in his happiness at having an heir. He wanted to know how Asterian would know how to summon the house elf, Kriaker, something that, in the wizarding world, could be considered common but not for a 9-year-old living in a Muggle orphanage. "I'd prefer to refrain from answering that question," was the only thing Asterian said. A tense and penetrating gaze continued between the two until Arcturus, sighing, admitted, "Very well, everyone has their secrets, Asterian. I won't question yours." As he said this, the tense atmosphere naturally dissipated. Pack your belongings, Asterion. We're going to the Black Manor, Arcturus said, getting up from the bed. He headed towards the door, but before leaving, he threw in one last remark, by the way, control the killer intent of the cursed spirit in your shadow. It's giving away your location. After that, he left the room without waiting for his great-grandson's response. Baskerville, if you think about killing my great-grandfather again, I'll remove you and place Nidhogg in my shadow. Looking at his own shadow where hundreds of pairs of red eyes opened, Asterion didn't hesitate to threaten the Hellhound, depriving it of the thing it valued most in the world, being his guardian. Asterion's shadow rippled gently, showing its submission to him. Asterion snorted, walked to the bed, and crouched down. He reached under the bed and pulled out a suitcase. Not long after, he began to gather everything that was his in this room, which wasn't much to begin with. Looking at his room that had sheltered him for so many years, Asterion contemplated for a moment and then left the room, carrying his suitcase. Outside the orphanage, Asterion could be seen bidding farewell to the orphanage head and the other sisters who had cared for him since his birth in this world. No other child came to say goodbye, not that it mattered to Asterion, he had already helped those ungrateful and heartless children enough. Although he claimed to have taken everything in the room, he had left all the cursed spirits protecting the place from any threat. Before leaving, Isabel Morgan gave a disdainful look to Arcturus, who generously chose to ignore the woman's anger. Over almost 90 years, he had learned that the only way to win an argument with a woman was to ignore her outright. Let's go. Holding Asterion's shoulder, Arcturus spoke as they walked forward. Asterion didn't speak and just looked at the women gradually disappearing from his sight with a bitter feeling in his chest until he couldn't even see the orphanage or those kind women anymore. Don't vomit, Arcturus said, drawing the attention of his great-grandson, still saddened by the departure. Asterion looked confused at Arcturus and soon noticed they were in an alley. Suddenly, with a loud snap, the world in his view began to spin wildly in all directions. He felt as if he were being squeezed through an endless, tiny tube that seemed to have no end. London Grimmauld Place, number 12. Ancestral Manor of the House of Black. When his feet touched the ground again, Asterion felt his organs shifting in different directions. A strong urge to vomit grew in his chest, and it seemed like he might throw up his afternoon snack at any moment. Fortunately, he took a deep breath and gradually calmed himself. Asterion lifted his head and glared at the old man with fury. I'll have my revenge, just wait, old dead man. Asterion spoke each word through gritted teeth. Arcturus simply laughed at his great-grandson's misery and walked toward the beautiful mansion. It was then that Asterion looked at the stunning mansion with a surprised expression on his face. The Black family mansion, situated on Grimmauld Place, stood as a monument to grandeur and mystery. The facade was a striking expression of Victorian-era Gothic architecture, with tall towers reaching up into the night sky. The dark stone from which it was built was adorned with intricate silver details that captured the moonlight, creating reflections that danced upon the walls. The main entrance was marked by a massive oak door, skillfully carved with magical symbols that seemed to pulse with their own energy. The gardens surrounding the mansion were meticulously maintained, with trimmed shrubs and flower beds of darker tones blooming in mysterious colors. A magical fountain, sculpted with details that told stories of ancient magic, rested in the center of the garden, emitting a soft light that illuminated the dark nights. It was entirely different from the mansion described in the movies and books, but upon reflection, in the original reality, after the death of Walburga Black in 1985, the mansion went decades without being cared for. It was natural that the mansion was in perfect condition with Arcturus living in it. After all, it was where he resided, and no one would want to live in a dirty and crumbling place. Entering the entrance hall, what caught Asterion's attention wasn't how luxurious the place was, nor the chandelier made of crystals exuding a soft light that illuminated the surroundings, nor the soft black carpet that made you feel like you were stepping on clouds, but an intricate statue on the wall facing the door. It was the statue of a man, wearing a classic wizard's robe. He looked handsome, or at least the artist who made it intended him to be so, but what caught attention the most were the statue's eyes. They were red. Upon closer inspection, one could see that they were two extremely bright rubies. The statue's eyes seemed to judge anyone entering through the massive oak doors of the Black Mansion. Asterion couldn't help but narrow his eyes thoughtfully, feeling the colossal negative magical energy emanating from the statue. It was the first time he truly felt the power of the special grade. It was oppressive, powerful, and terribly malevolent. Noticing Asterion's tension, Arcturus explained with a sense of pride in his voice, "It's the cursed spirit that our ancestor, Corvinus Black, captured near the end of his life. The statue serves as a seal, imprisoning the monster within. This is also the last line of defense for the mansion, which would only be activated when the Black Mansion is destroyed, taking us and our enemies together to hell. Asterion had only one thought in his mind. I hope it's not Sukuna or Mahoraga. Translated by AI. Chapter 8, Chapter 07, The Young Heir of House Black. May 30, 1990. Black House Mansion. 1 month. That was the time Asterion spent in this magnificent mansion, and honestly, it was a pleasant experience he never expected to end. The entire mansion was divided into 9 parts: the entrance hall, living room, dining hall, guest rooms, main bedrooms, forbidden library, ballroom, room of animated portraits, and finally, the enchanted gardens. Asterion spent most of his hours in the forbidden library. As the name itself suggests, the library was a treasure trove of forbidden knowledge, with ebony shelves filled with volumes bound in black leather. The soft light from magical lanterns highlighted ancient scrolls, while leather armchairs invited readers to unravel the hidden secrets within the forbidden pages. Ancient masks and magical artifacts adorned the shelves, creating an atmosphere of reverence for the lost and archaic knowledge from 1,000 years ago. He threw himself with open arms into the sea of knowledge, finding himself fascinated by magic and the epics of human history in the face of adversities imposed by destiny itself. A destiny where humans triumphed in the face of the impossible, regardless of what they sacrificed. And magic, a whisper of chaos and entropy, where sorcerers imposed their own will on reality. Seated in the soft and comfortable leather armchair, Asterion was reading a book that held great importance to him. This book compiled the experiences of all the bearers of the Black House's inherent technique, where they openly shared their life experiences, struggles, passions, and the complete insanity that pervaded their minds, without any distinction between good and evil. In the pages bordering on madness, the knowledge of his 9 predecessors in the creation and manipulation of cursed spirits was recorded. Being he, Asterion Regulus Black, the 10th to possess this powerful inherent technique. The grandeur of these predecessors was indescribable, each one a genius in their own measure, transcending the limits of the prodigious, and often, the insane. Yes, geniuses. That was the only adjective Asterion could use to explain the brilliance of his predecessors, there was no other word to describe them. Each more prodigious than the other, geniuses among geniuses, as well as mad among the mad. Among them, Corvinus Black stood out, the notorious ancestor of Asterion and the founder of the Black House. Corvinus Black, a dark lord who ruled during the years 800 to 1000 AD, leaving an extraordinary legacy in the annals of wizarding history. Faced with the tens of thousands of pages detailing the experiments conducted with his inherent technique, Asterion couldn't help but feel a mixture of admiration and apprehension. He realized he was a mere novice in the presence of these extraordinary men and women, a pure and innocent white rabbit compared to the insane complexity of their minds. These individuals had crossed the boundaries between sanity and insanity, revealing themselves as true visionaries or, in some cases, complete lunatics. Asterion glimpsed the possibility of also following the same fate in the face of the tempting whispers in the form of writing on those pages with forbidden knowledge. They conducted tests on humans, cursed spirits, and any species they deemed intriguing. All of this for a single purpose, a goal speculated by Corvinus Black before his death, and one that all 9 predecessors of Asterion embraced without hesitation or fear. So, the second bearer of the Black House's inherent technique, Ares Black, devised the most insane, mad, and dirty plan a human could conceive. The plan for creating gods. Just by its blasphemous name, you could imagine the madness and megalomaniacal arrogance of the man. Asterion finally understood why there were such a vast number of books and scrolls explaining the anatomy of various species, the vast majority extinct in the face of the relentless power that was time. Allowing his body to fall weakly into the armchair, Asterion closed the book and held it tightly in his arms. In the end, he felt that perhaps he wasn't so different from those who came before him. His attempt to create a cursed spirit capable of devouring all magical energy, wasn't it a budget version of the plan for creating gods that Corvinus and Ares proposed? It seemed like destiny was playing with him, like a puppeteer pushing him toward the abyss of insanity. The lingering question remained, one that everyone wanted to know, including Asterion himself. Would he be cruel enough to walk this path? Grindelwald pursued and still pursues this path, a path where his ambition surpasses all that is moral and human, regardless of how many people would die in the process. Asterion didn't know, and he didn't want to think about it at this moment. He closed his eyes and murmured to himself. Perhaps it was a recurring question throughout the millennia, where geniuses asked the same question, where the ends justify the means. How many have died for my ambition? He reflected on this phrase countless times in his mind. Observing his great-grandson distracted while eating, Arcturus elegantly wiped his mouth with a white handkerchief. You seem distracted, Asterion. Is something bothering you? The man's black eyes looked at the child with concern. Grandfather, you read that book? Asterion asked, raising his head and looking directly into his grandfather's eyes. You mean the book that every bearer of the family's inherent technique must read? Arcturus furrowed his brow, asking somewhat uncertainly. He remembered seeing Asterion reading the book earlier in the library but hadn't paid much attention at the time. It seems he gave something he shouldn't have to his great-grandson. Yes, Asterion replied. Arcturus looked at his great-grandson's pale face and responded honestly, only those who have inherited the true inherent technique of the family can read that book. I tried when I was your age, but it didn't open to me. You read something that bothered you. Arcturus quickly connected the dots and narrowed his eyes thoughtfully. Asterion lowered his head, keeping his gaze downcast. Although I cannot speak about it, as I am bound by the eternal vow, but what they want me to do, it's simply insane. How insane are we talking about? Arcturus furrowed his brows deeply. He did not expect this to happen when he gave the book to Asterion. So insane that it makes Voldemort seem like a pure and adorable little bunny in front of our ancestors, Asterion replied with a wry smile, hiding the bitterness beneath. Arcturus widened his eyes in shock but quickly composed himself. I don't know what you read in that book, but you are a black, Asterion. I can advise you, but only you will carry the weight of your actions. He looked at his great-grandson and continued, no matter what our ancestors desire, what truly matters is what you want. But for now, don't think too much about it. You're only 9 years old, you still have plenty of time. As he finished speaking, silence dominated the atmosphere, a thoughtful yet comfortable silence. Translated by AI. Chapter 9, Chapter 08, The Young Heir of House Black. In the Black Mansion, breakfast was served at 7 o'clock, lunch at 11 o'clock, afternoon tea at 1500 hours, and dinner was served at 1830. Never late or early. Punctuality was something the old patriarch of the Black House highly valued, so Asterion always made an effort to be punctual to avoid a long discourse on the importance of punctuality from Arcturus. Asterion descended the stairs for breakfast to find Arcturus comfortably reading a newspaper while sipping a cup of hot coffee. Taking a sip of coffee as he turned the newspaper page, Arcturus greeted his great-grandson. Good morning, Asterion. Good morning, grandfather, Asterion replied as he spread strawberry jam on his toast. He was seated on the right side of the table, near the central chair where only the patriarch could sit. Noticing Arcturus' interest in the newspaper, Asterion asked curiously, any interesting news? Just Grindelwald doing his usual with his acolytes in Europe, preaching his beliefs and recruiting more followers for his cause, said Arcturus, his voice indifferent and cold, showing no change when mentioning the Dark Lord. Dumbledore and Grindelwald have never faced each other? Asterion asked curiously. He was genuinely curious about the fate of the two lovers in this alternate reality. After a moment of silence, Arcturus replied, not that I know of, but I presume there hasn't been a battle between the two. A fight between wizards of their caliber would easily destroy a city, and concealing the destruction of an entire city is not an easy feat. Asterion nodded in agreement with his words. Baskerville was only a semi-special grade cursed spirit, but the dog was capable of easily destroying a large expanse of land. The destructive power of a special grade would be even more devastating, like walking atomic bombs. Arcturus continued speaking while reading his newspaper. Although there was no direct confrontation between the two men, the main forces on both sides clashed in Berlin and Paris. The two cities were nearly destroyed during the war. To this day, the magical ministries of both countries harbor a deep hatred for Grindelwald and Dumbledore. So, the two main protagonists of the war didn't face each other directly. That's interesting. Could it be that they didn't want to or couldn't fight each other? Asterion's lips curved into a mysterious smile, pondering the eternal vow between the two, which likely had not been broken so far. Looking at his great-grandson with suspicion, Arcturus asked with a slightly surprised tone, are you suggesting that Grindelwald and Dumbledore have an eternal vow preventing them from fighting each other? Maybe. Asterion just shrugged and calmly continued eating his breakfast. Arcturus snorted coldly at the innocent appearance of the cheeky boy. If he didn't know any better, he might have thought his great-grandson was a seer. The boy did say strange things from time to time. When Asterion finished eating, he was about to retire to his room when he was stopped by Arcturus' voice, your etiquette, politics, and fencing teacher will arrive today at 3 p.m. Be presentable and ready to join us for afternoon tea. Someone you know? Asterion asked curiously. Yes, my great-niece and your cousin, Narcissa Malfoy, born Black, the old man replied, closing the newspaper and placing it on the table. The house elves of the Black House, along with Kriaker, swiftly cleared the table with a simple wave of their wands. Her husband didn't want their son to inherit the Black Throne. Asterion said, recalling the old patriarch's angry words he had heard once. Humph! Even if I were to die, that man's son would never inherit this mansion. A descendant who has not practiced the simplified inherent technique will never become the patriarch of the noble House Black. Arcturus' eyes clearly expressed the disdain he felt for Narcissa's husband, Lucius Malfoy. So why did you allow his wife to come and teach me? Asterion, aware of Arcturus' contempt for Lucius, couldn't understand how the old patriarch would allow the wife of someone he disliked to instruct him. Boy, family is family. Your cousin, Narcissa, is a true Black. We protect each other, regardless of anything. Arcturus looked sternly at his great-grandson, who listened with the same seriousness, and continued with the explanation. Even with what Bellatrix did, your other cousin, I placed her in a special cell in Azkaban. That's what a family should do. We are kin above all else, always united against the world. So why was Andromeda expelled from the family? Asterion asked, expressing one of his doubts after hearing his great-grandfather's words. If his family valued family affection so much, it seemed irrational to expel Andromeda Black. She. Upon hearing the name of his other great-niece, Arcturus showed a complicated expression before responding. She was not expelled for marrying that trash she calls a husband. She was expelled for choosing not to practice the simplified inherent technique of the family. She chose not to be a Black, so she didn't need to bear the burden of the family. Asterion understood. Whether Narcissa or Bellatrix, both practiced the simplified inherent technique of the Black House, the manipulation of cursed spirits. Each member had the choice to practice or not practice this technique. If they chose to practice, they would be considered a true Black and enjoyed all the power and prestige of the family, but if they chose not to practice, they would not be recognized as such by the family and would be expelled. Don't worry, grandfather, I'll be properly ready to welcome my dear cousin, Asterion said, showing a rare smile on his lips. Arcturus was surprised by the boy's smile and simply closed his eyes with an equally rare smile. Although the boy was sarcastic, somewhat careless, and had terrible habits, he was learning that family was the most important thing in this cold world, where only family affection could give a bit of warmth. Translate by IA. Chapter 10, Chapter 09, The Young Heir of House Black. Few were the expectations that Narcissa held for the roles she would play in life, and certainly being a tutor was not among them, especially for a cousin who until recently didn't even exist. However, she accepted the responsibility of instructing the boy with an unusual pleasure, observing her husband's expression of anger upon learning of the boy's existence, making the remaining days of the year considerably more enjoyable. Although she certainly did not show this happiness while savoring a delicious piece of chocolate cake, delighting in watching her husband's fit of rage, breaking all the fine oriental porcelain in the mansion. Definitely, she wasn't happy to see her husband's misery. What a terrible wife she was. However, she was filled with curiosity regarding this newly appeared cousin, the same one who had thwarted all the plans of her simple-minded husband. The letter she received from her great-uncle, although containing basic information about the boy, left much to be desired in terms of details. The old patriarch carefully concealed important details about the young man in the skillfully written nuances of the letter. This indicated that Arcturus Black was assigning significant importance to the boy, which further heightened Narcissa's curiosity. The man was not someone who easily attached himself to mediocre individuals. As the tutor appointed by Arcturus for the boy, it was evident that she was summoned to shape him into a true Black in every aspect. Her cousin had spent 9 years in a Muggle orphanage, and thus, Narcissa anticipated encountering an individual lacking manners, awkward, and with little courage to meet others' gaze. Transforming the boy would undoubtedly be a challenging task, but she was determined to accomplish such a feat. Crossing the secure barrier that enveloped the entire mansion's territory, Narcissa gazed upon the imposing structure that had been her home for much of her life, her icy and cold blue eyes carrying a touch of nostalgia. She advanced on a black high heel along the stone path that meandered around the fountain, heading towards the majestic stairs that led to the massive oak doors. Intricately carved into the wood, the crest of House Black, a raven with red eyes and wings spread open, adorned the doors. While ringing the doorbell, Narcissa allowed herself to reminisce about the days she had spent in this mansion. Although marked by the strictness of the rules, she learned that the best part of her life was living in this mansion with her sisters, cousins, uncles, and grandparents. A place where she was not seen as a monster in everyone's eyes. Perhaps that's why her mother, Druella, and her aunt, Walburga, raised her and her sisters this way, forging strong women to survive in this world. As she reflected on the dearest memories flooding her mind, Narcissa noticed that the door had swung open. A man, dressed in a black suit adorned with silver threads, stood before her. His nearly all-white hair displayed 2 black stripes on either side of his head, and his impeccably groomed beard followed the same pattern. Tall and broad-shouldered, he did not seem at all like an elderly man, despite having fought for a lengthy 70 years. His black eyes were as icy as one would expect from someone with a long history of battles. Narcissa's cold countenance broke into a gentle smile as she looked at her great-uncle Arcturus Black. "Narcissa, it gladdens me to see you in good health," he said in his hoarse and serious voice, which seemed to soften as his eyes fell upon her. He extended his hand, displaying the Patriarch Black's ring. Narcissa bowed and gently kissed the ring, greeting one of the few remaining relatives still alive. "The feeling is mutual, grandfather," she replied, casting a kind glance at the man. If anyone witnessed this moment, they would surely think they were under the influence of an illusion spell, for the cold and arrogant Narcissa Malfoy never smiled, not even to her own children. "Come in, tea is served, we are just waiting for you," Arcturus Black said, making way and gesturing for her to enter. "Thank you, grandfather," expressed Narcissa, stepping into her childhood home. The two walked through the slightly dim corridors in silence, not an uncomfortable silence, but rather one that invited tranquility. Upon entering the dining room, Narcissa immediately noticed the absence of her Aunt Walburga Black's animated portrait. Typically, it would be hanging on the wall facing the door, the first thing to be noticed upon entering the elegant dining hall. Though perplexed, she chose not to question it immediately. Then, her eyes fell upon the child seated on the right side of the table, a chair traditionally occupied by the heir of House Black. Looking at the child's appearance, she was genuinely surprised. She had expected to see a mannerless beggar, but what she was witnessing was a small and charming prince. He bore no resemblance to her cousin Regulus, the only similarity they shared was the hair, sleek and as black as a raven's feathers. However, Narcissa noticed something crucial, something Arcturus had not mentioned in the letter he sent her. Staring into the child's red eyes, everything became clear to her. She understood why Arcturus wanted her as the boy's tutor, and comprehended the need for such confidentiality. The boy would be of utmost importance in the future, a pillar that would sustain the entire British wizarding community. More precisely, he would be utilized as a weapon to deter enemies within and outside of Britain. Simply by his existence, the whole of England would benefit internationally. No one would dare attack another country when there was a man who could literally command entire exercises of cursed spirits. After all, the history books were there, it was not uncommon for one magical community to attack another. The entire world was a struggle for resources. Excluding a few noble houses on Albus Dumbledore's side, all the other noble houses in England would easily bend their knees before him. They would finally have someone who could stand up against Albus Dumbledore in the Wizengamot, someone who would fight for their rights. Quite literally, he would be a king. "Dear grandfather, you truly know how to surprise a woman," Narcissa remarked, looking at the man's presumptuous face and speaking dryly. She knew he had done it on purpose, merely to embarrass her. "Ha ha ha," Arcturus responded with a low, hearty laugh. He looked at his grandniece and gestured for her to sit in the chair on the left, facing the boy. "Take a seat, let's talk over tea." Narcissa released a resigned sigh and gracefully sat in the chair, her cold eyes fixed on the boy. Translation by AI. Chapter 11, Chapter 10, Asterion and Narcissa. "So, does the boy have potential, Narcissa?" Arcturus asked, discreetly glancing at the 9-year-old boy. Asterion heard the patriarch's words and raised an eyebrow in protest. In the man's description, he seemed insufferable, someone beyond redemption. To express his dissatisfaction, he merely snorted loudly enough and remained silent, staring at Arcturus. In his mind, he was working tirelessly, devising a revenge plan that would give the old black patriarch a heart attack. Narcissa looked at the boy in front of her, from head to toe, pondered for a moment, and replied, "Yes, the boy sits upright and has very good posture, he just needs to learn how to behave like a noble. He drinks tea like a toothless horse." Asterion, who was sipping his tea without caring about what they were saying about him, furrowed his brows in irritation. What was wrong with holding the cup without the support of the saucer? No rush, Narcissa. He'll learn eventually, you'll teach him well. I have confidence in that, Arcturus replied, sipping his tea in silence, enjoying the company of his great-grandson and niece. Narcissa nodded and sipped her tea while her gaze remained fixed on the boy. She seemed to analyze every part of him, trying to uncover what was behind the cold and indifferent expression he reflected on his face, an expression familiar to a member of the Black family and quite renowned in the wizarding world. Asterion attempted to mimic the way they held the cup and saucer. After confirming that his action was correct, he looked at Arcturus coldly, as if to say, "Look, I'm a genius." Arcturus generously ignored him with a bored look and continued with what he was doing, sipping his tea. After Asterion's brief display of childishness, the three of them remained in silence. As Asterion observed his relatives Arcturus, Narcissa, and himself, he noticed something interesting. It seemed that the facial paralysis appeared to be hereditary. The three members of the Black family at this table shared the same expression, cold and indifferent, as if nothing could shake them. Perhaps it was due to practicing the simplified inborn technique? Well, swallowing the dirtiest thing humanity has to offer daily does incredible things to someone's mind. What will be your first step, Narcissa? Arcturus asked, placing the saucer and cup on the table. After a brief moment of silence, she replied as she finished her tea, "Firstly, I'll take care of his clothes." "What's wrong with the clothes I bought for him?" Arcturus frowned, looking at Narcissa. "That's the point. You bought 18th century clothes for Asterion," Narcissa spoke sarcastically, glancing at the relics that Arcturus called clothes on Asterion's body. "They're elegant attire," Arcturus responded briefly, unconcerned about the sarcastic smile on his great niece's lips. Asterion wholeheartedly agreed with Narcissa, those clothes were not only too large but also challenging to put on. He needed help every time he attempted to wear those ancient pieces of clothing. Arcturus ignored the uncultured individuals at the table who couldn't appreciate beautiful fabric even if they saw it in person. "Come with me, Asterion." Narcissa stood up and called Asterion to leave the dining hall together. Asterion waved goodbye to Arcturus and followed Narcissa, a look of happiness reflecting in his beautiful red eyes. Finally, he would be free from those cursed medieval clothes. He couldn't understand why he had to wear such attire while his great-grandfather sported an elegant suit blended with modern and Victorian styles. I bet one of my kidneys he wanted to embarrass me. "Where are we going?" Asterion asked, keeping pace with the relatively quick stride of the elegant woman. "Your room. I have to transfigure your clothes into something decent," replied Narcissa, walking directly to the Black Heir's room. The heir's room had always been the same, so she knew exactly where it was located. Asterion just nodded and looked at Narcissa carefully. She was undeniably the most stunning woman he had ever seen in 2 lifetimes. Narcissa was quite tall, standing at 185 centimeters, and with the elegant high heels she wore, she easily reached 190 centimeters. Her pale blonde hair was impeccably arranged in a bun, highlighting her refined and angular face, making her look beautiful but equally majestic. Narcissa's eyes were blue, a very light shade, akin to a frozen lake, as cold as the gaze she emanated. She wore a stylish, very modern black dress with an obvious Victorian flair. The black lace collar of the dress was high, covering a good portion of her slender neck. The woman embodied elegance and power, far from the trophy wife portrayal often seen in movies. Photo. Upon entering his room, Narcissa looked around and displayed a satisfied expression. The room was impeccably clean and tidy, without a single speck of dust or clothes scattered on the floor. Even the items on the desk were perfectly arranged. "Very nice, your entire room is neat and clean," Narcissa commented, praising the entire room. "I'm not a pig to live in a pigsty." Asterion found it quite normal to have a clean and fresh environment, anything else would disrupt his sleep and activities. "Believe me when I say most boys aren't like this, especially at Hogwarts. Imagine 6 13-year-olds in one room," Narcissa said, walking towards the closet. Asterion felt a shiver running down his spine at her words. The mere thought of 6 hormone-filled teenagers together in one room was the vision of an environment akin to hell for someone who loved cleanliness as he did. "Don't worry, dear. Only Gryffindor and Hufflepuff have dormitories that crowded. Slytherin has individual rooms, and Ravenclaw has shared rooms with pairs." Perhaps sensing Asterion's tension, Narcissa explained as she opened the closet doors. Asterion sighed in relief at the explanation. He had promised himself that if that old, dirty hat dared to sort him into any house other than Slytherin, he would burn it without hesitation. While Asterion was preoccupied with his future at Hogwarts, Narcissa examined all the clothes in the closet. She couldn't help but display a radiant look upon realizing that all the garments were enchanted through complex processes of alchemy and ancient runes. Enchanted clothes were exceptionally expensive, not only due to the magical fabric but also the time-consuming and costly process of enchantments involving alchemy and ancient runes. While still residing in the Black Manor, all her clothes were enchanted. However, when she married Lucius Malfoy, that luxury disappeared. Despite the wealth of the Malfoy family, it wasn't as vast as one might imagine, particularly in the years after the war. When the Malfoy family had to donate significant sums every year to maintain their status as leaders of the Pureblood faction. In 10 years, she never wore another enchanted garment, only common magical fabric without protective effects, warmth and cold resistance, and self-cleaning. This made her realize how challenging life was for the less fortunate. Asterion, noticing Narcissa's slightly envious gaze, nodded with great satisfaction. One of the reasons for choosing the Black family was its wealth. It was a family with a history spanning over 1,000 years. Even though there were incompetent patriarchs, many intelligent individuals had accumulated vast wealth over these millennia. Chapter 12, Chapter 11, Asterion and Narcissa. Asterion, you must remember that when you transfigure something enchanted, you must not alter the runes written on the inner part of the object. These runes are the gears that keep everything in order. Once even one of the runes is altered, the entire enchantment will be broken. As she sorted through the clothes, piece by piece, getting ready to start transfiguring, Narcissa didn't forget to instruct Asterion, who listened attentively to every word. Looking at the medieval clothes, Narcissa huffed and drew her own wand, black and sleek, about 24 centimeters long. With a flick of her wrist and hands, the tip of the wand glowed red. She pointed it at the piece of clothing in question, and the complicated transfiguration process began. A strong wool twisted and altered the very fabric of the cloth. The material changed according to Narcissa's will, shaping into what she desired and wanted. Moments later, a completely new piece of clothing appeared in front of Asterion, simple black pants. Soon, there were white long-sleeved shirts, belts, shoes. Narcissa transfigured hundreds of clothes in less than 10 minutes. It's been a while since I've used so much transfiguration. Professor McGonagall would be quite proud if she saw, Narcissa murmured to herself, looking at the hundreds of pieces of clothing flying back into the closet with a flick of her wand. What do you think, Asterion? Narcissa asked, looking at the almost 10-year-old boy. A magnificent display, Asterion spoke sincerely. It was truly magical to see Matter obeying Narcissa's commands. He understood perfectly why wizards considered all other races inferior. This power, the power to shape reality with a simple wave of the hand, was truly extraordinary. In a literal sense, wizards were slightly less powerful gods. You will be even more extraordinary in this discipline given your inborn technique. Perhaps in the future, you could transfigure an entire city if you wish. It would certainly be a scene recorded in the annals of history, Narcissa said to Asterion as the image of her own words appeared in her mind, a scene she truly wished to witness. Asterion understood why Narcissa said that. His inborn technique was very similar to transfiguration magic in certain senses, perhaps it would be the easiest discipline for him at Hogwarts. He also remembered the pinnacle of transfiguration, animagus. A wizard who physically transformed into a specific animal. There were so few in England that you could count them on your fingers, but obviously, the count couldn't be that low. Asterion supposed that many animagi never registered with the Ministry of Magic. The reason was quite obvious: trump cards shouldn't be revealed until a life or death moment. Only fools would disclose all their abilities to someone. If he remembered correctly, Harry's father, James Potter, and all his friends were unregistered animagus. James was even more extraordinary, becoming an animagus while still attending Hogwarts. In the original reality, unfortunately, Harry didn't inherit his father's strong transfiguration talent or his mother's extraordinary potion-making skills, only James's most useless talent for flying on brooms. Asterion wondered what animal he would transform into when the time came. He would like to be a panther or a flying creature if possible. Sitting on the bed, Narcissa looked at Asterion with a cold gaze and said, "Now that we're done with your clothes, we'll start preparing you." "Preparing me for what?" Asterion furrowed his brow, slightly confused. "Well, we have about 6 months to turn you from a rude commoner into a true Prince Charming," Narcissa replied with a rather sadistic smile, in the eyes of young Asterion. "I don't understand the rush." Asterion looked confusedly at the elegantly seated woman on his bed. Arcturus had advised to go slow with the boy, but Narcissa thought otherwise. She not only had to teach etiquette, which was time-consuming, but also politics and fencing lessons, all within a short 6-month period. Regarding the 6-month deadline, young heirs are typically introduced to wizarding society at the age of 10, celebrated with a grand masquerade ball. You will turn 10 in 6 months, and 10 is usually the age when heirs of noble houses are formally presented to other powerful houses. Particularly for the House of Black, which will gather almost all the noble houses of England and possible nobles from other countries to celebrate your birthday, Narcissa explained patiently, leaving nothing out. I understand. Let's not waste any time, Narcissa. Knowing that he would formally debut in Wizarding Society, Asterion became serious. He didn't want to embarrass himself or Arcturus, who had taken care of him with such devotion during their time together. In his eyes, Arcturus was already his grandfather. Narcissa nodded, very pleased. Training was pointless if you didn't strive to improve, and the boy at least had that mindset. That made her satisfied, especially compared to when she tried to teach her own children. They were like rats running back and forth without caring about the lessons she imparted. Let's begin by learning how to sit properly in the chair for various occasions, she said, getting up from the bed and placing a chair in the center of the room. Asterion listened attentively and asked questions when necessary. At night, on the same day. How was your first lesson, Asterion? Sitting at the dining table, Arcturus asked as he wiped the corner of his mouth with a white handkerchief. Did you enjoy her teaching? Yes, she's a good tutor, Asterion replied. His gaze briefly fixed on the chocolate pudding, but then he returned his attention to the old patriarch Black. I can easily see myself liking her. She's sarcastic, intelligent, and a woman with strong willpower. Arcturus showed a relieved expression upon hearing this. It's good to see that you are getting along well. It eases my mind to know that you won't be alone when death claims me, he said, showing a warm smile as he looked at his great-grandson. With his words, the atmosphere in the dining hall turned somber and heavy. Realizing the atmosphere, Arcturus let out a low, deep laugh. He looked at the 9-year-old boy and said, Asterion, death to me is a relief. I will reunite with my wife, my children, grandchildren, and all those I loved in life. I have lived a long and exhausting life, fought most of it. For now, I just want to rest. Seeing the boy's somber face, Arcturus added, Of course, I will only depart from this world seeing you become a worthy and powerful man. Asterion's face brightened with his words. He looked directly into Arcturus's black eyes and responded with a determined gaze, I won't disappoint you, grandfather. That's good, Asterion. You need to want to improve to become better. Arcturus was very pleased with his great-grandson's actions. Translate by IA. Chapter 13, Chapter 12, Asterion and Narcissa. October 4, 1990. Asterion watched as Narcissa entered the training hall wearing black leggings and a matching sports bra, proudly displaying sizable breasts. Her toned, sexy stomach gently contracted with each step, her long, slender, powerful legs carrying her confidently. In one hand she wore UFC gloves while she put on the other glove with the help of her mouth. Asterion, nearly 10 years old, had the body of a 13-year-old youth, wearing only grey sweatpants and gloves on his hand. He was shirtless, displaying a body starting to develop muscular lines. Ready? She asked. Yes. He replied. Narcissa, with her fists clenched near her face, swiftly approached and threw a right punch. She used magical energy to bolster her body, causing that punch to almost exceed the speed of sound. Asterion dodged the fierce punch, leaned to the side, and countered with a left punch with the same amount of magical energy. Crash! The punch hit Narcissa's arm, which she had skillfully defended, anticipating the boy's attack. She was pushed back several meters, but before Asterion could get excited, she spun around and mercilessly kicked her cousin's ribs. Asterion only had time to reinforce his body with magical energy before being forced to step back several paces, feeling a sharp pain in his ribs. Apparently, the blow had fractured some of his rib bones, but nothing that a healing potion couldn't fix. But before he had time to recover, Asterion saw Narcissa coming at him, and he realized how bad the situation was when several punches relentlessly struck his face. Despite the beating, Asterion attempted to defend himself by raising his arms. He endured 5 seconds of blows capable of puncturing tanks and then kicked his tutor in the stomach. Narcissa smirked sadistically and grabbed Asterion's shin, despite the strong impact. Asterion knew he was in danger in that position and attempted to free his leg. However, before he could succeed, he found himself airborne, with Narcissa's elbow hitting him squarely in the center of his chest. Ugh! He opened his mouth and spat out a small amount of saliva. Asterion felt only the air painfully leaving his lungs as he fell hard to the ground. Nausea and dizziness left his brain blank for a few moments as he breathed heavily. You're improving for someone who's only been training for a few days. You managed to react and counter despite the blows, which is commendable, Asti, Narcissa commented, wiping the small beads of sweat from her forehead. Although the fight lasted less than 3 minutes in total, the amount of effort from both sides was significant, as they were using large amounts of magical energy to reinforce their bodies. This was something many wizards avoided doing for too long, as it could overload the body. During a fight, it was especially fatal to become too quickly fatigued. Still, I took a beating from you, Sissy, Asterion replied, still lying down, gradually regaining his breath and sitting up on the floor. He reached out his hand towards Narcissa, seemingly asking her to pull him up. Don't underestimate yourself. You've only been training for 2 days. I have extensive combat experience fighting cursed wizards, unlike you, who've only fought unintelligent cursed spirits, Narcissa responded, taking his hand and pulling him up to his feet. She gently touched the purple bruise below his right eye, where her punch had first landed. Asterion knew she was right, but he couldn't change the fact that he hated losing. To him, it meant weakness. However, the defeat didn't discourage him, it only fueled his desire to become stronger and overcome his own weaknesses. Again? Narcissa asked, noticing the determination in the boy's eyes. Asterion nodded and got back into his fighting stance. This time, Asterion didn't wait for Narcissa to attack. He threw a punch with his right hand, his dominant hand charged with a large amount of magical energy. Narcissa naturally defended against the punch, but she wasn't expecting a barrage of extremely powerful punches raining down on her. Each punch from Asterion carried a substantial amount of magical energy, making it feel like her bones were about to break at any moment. Knowing she couldn't endure this for much longer, Narcissa kicked Asterion's right leg, causing him to lose his balance. Narcissa seized the opportunity, spinning and kicking the boy's chest. However, Asterion was expecting it and caught the powerful kick, ignoring the impact, which made him lean back slightly. I think I got you, Sissy, Asterion showed an excited look in his eyes despite the intense pain in his hands. While holding onto her leg, he kicked her in the abdomen, hitting her, causing her to grunt from the blow. But before he could feel triumphant, Narcissa managed to break free. Like a lithe snake, she swiftly grabbed Asterion's shoulders and wrapped her legs around his neck, locking him in with her thighs. Then, she spun her body, causing both of them to fall to the ground. Surprised by the infamous move, Asterion found himself unable to escape from Narcissa's soft yet powerful legs, which held him firmly in place, rendering him immobile. He tried to break free, but each attempt resulted in the air in his lungs becoming increasingly scarce, dangerously close to suffocation. Realizing he couldn't escape, he tapped 3 times on her thigh, signaling his surrender. Naturally, Narcissa released the boy, who breathed rapidly, trying to recover the lost air in his lungs. This round was better than the last. You used my weaknesses against me, but I felt that you relaxed when you kicked me, allowing me the chance to escape and counterattack, Narcissa praised Asterion, standing up and lightly touching her slightly bruised abdomen. However, she didn't hesitate to reprimand him. You must not relax at any moment during the fight, Asti. But I can see why you did. You probably only fought weak cursed spirits that never put pressure on you. That's subtly influencing you. I have to beat it out of you even more to make you forget that bad habit. Asterion knew she was right. He slapped his face with both hands to snap out of it and stood up again, ready to take another beating. Again? Narcissa asked. Let's do it, he replied, with seriousness in his voice. Asterion took a deep breath and focused entirely. He got back into position, fists raised near his face, ready to attack or defend at any moment. Narcissa was right, Asterion knew it. He had never moved much during fights. Baskerville always did his job perfectly, which made him lazy and careless. He was lucky not to have fought against an intelligent humanoid cursed spirit, otherwise, he would be dead. Chapter 14, Patreon. Support me to write more and read chapters ahead of all regular readers. The Patreon will be updated daily, except on Saturdays and Sundays, when I do not write. Next chapter, Chapter 13, Asterion and Narcissa, Chapter 14, Asterion and Narcissa, Chapter 15, Gringotts. p-atreon.com/hpscb. Chapter 15, Chapter 13, Asterion and Narcissa. Asterion lay on the ground completely exhausted, his chest rising and falling rapidly, his body covered in sweat and bruises. Beside him, Narcissa was not much different, exhausted and covered in bruises, especially in the abdominal region and some on her face. But whether it was Asterion or Narcissa, both exhibited a satisfied look on their faces, knowing that they had grown stronger with each fighting session. Looking at the bruises on his 30-year-old cousin's beautiful face, Asterion reached out and gently stroked her cheek with a look of apology, although his own face remained expressionless. His fingers glided over her slightly sweaty skin, sliding smoothly. "I'm sorry, sissy, I didn't mean to hurt you," his softened voice carried a touch of guilt. "Sweet of you, but I'm not a weak girl, Asti. Besides, look at yourself before worrying about me," Narcissa said, her voice cold yet melodic, sounding like a whisper akin to the silent night breeze. It would be a lie to say that Asterion's concern didn't warm her heart. This was a feeling she had only experienced with her family, not even her stupid husband or children could thaw her frozen heart, burdened by all the pain she felt when she left this mansion and saw the world for what it truly is. Asterion blinked a few times, processing what he had just heard, and showed a small smile, barely perceptible if you didn't look carefully. It seemed ordinary, even mundane, to someone who always had something like this, but the feeling of having someone else concerned about your well-being was something only those who never had it could truly appreciate. It was something Narcissa noticed, and she showed a slightly subdued look. It was the first time she had seen Asterion smile in these 5 months of tutoring, and it made her happy. It truly meant that the two of them had grown even closer. She needed someone at this moment, especially now, with things becoming increasingly unbearable at the Malfoy Manor. She let out a heavy, somewhat sad sigh, which Asterion noticed, and he narrowed his eyes thoughtfully. "Let's take a shower, the sweat is making me uncomfortable," Narcissa said suddenly, getting up from the floor as she reached out her hand to her cousin. Asterion took her hand and stood up, agreeing with her words, and they both walked out of the training hall. Asterion was still discovering how many places there were in this 1,000-year-old mansion. She let out a heavy, somewhat sad sigh, which Asterion noticed, and he narrowed his eyes thoughtfully. "Let's take a shower, the sweat is making me uncomfortable," Narcissa said suddenly, getting up from the floor as she reached out her hand to Asterion. Asterion took her hand and stood up, agreeing with her words, and they both walked out of the training hall. Asterion was still discovering how many hidden places there were in this 1,000-year-old mansion. Narcissa removed her sports bra, casually tossing it onto the bathroom floor, freeing her sizable breasts and pink nipples. She then leaned over to remove her leggings and black underwear, without a care in the world, fully exposing her nudity to Asterion. As Asterion gazed upon the beautiful naked body before him, he couldn't help but feel disdain for Lucius Malfoy, a heterosexual man who couldn't appreciate such a Greek goddess. He deserved to choke on a banana for his lack of appreciation. After admiring the beautiful sight for a while, Asterion also removed his clothes, in his case, the grey sweatpants. Lifting his head and looking ahead, he saw Narcissa next to the marble bathtub in the center of the luxurious bathroom, the entire surface of the water covered with delicate silver bubbles. Narcissa first lifted her leg and placed it in the hot water at the right temperature, then she fully immersed herself in the bathtub, settling in as she let out a delightful and comfortable sigh. Asterion approached and entered the bathtub alongside her, settling into the valley between her breasts and completely relaxing as he felt the hot water submerge his body. Narcissa wet his hair with water and bubbles from the bath, then gently stroked his scalp with her nails. Asterion closed his eyes and moaned with the heavenly comfort he was feeling in this moment. "Sissy, you spoil me too much." A crack in his closed eyes opened as Asterion complained with a voice though cold, very soft, but he didn't move an inch. Only a fool would do such a thing. Given the unique circumstances of the moment, it wasn't uncommon in their daily lives. They had taken baths together before, and they had even slept together many times. Nothing perverse ever occurred, they simply felt comfortable in each other's presence. Narcissa continued to stroke his silky hair with one hand, while the other hand gently slid over Asterion's neck, shoulder, and abdomen, wiping away the sweat from their previous training session. "Sissy, I feel like something is bothering you. You're spending more time at the Black Manor than with your own family." His concern was genuine. In the 5 months they had spent together, he had been by her side most of the time, gradually beginning to see Narcissa as an older sister he had never had in 2 lifetimes. Seeing her hide her anxieties made his heart ache as if an invisible hand were crushing it, leaving him extremely anxious. For someone who rarely expressed his feelings and preferred to suffer alone, it was an incredible situation that he never imagined experiencing years ago in the orphanage. Narcissa's movements abruptly stopped at his sudden question. She looked into his eyes, which resembled beautiful rubies, and noticed the concern reflected in his gaze, which deeply touched her. On impulse, she hugged him, crushing him against her chest as if she wished to merge with the boy. "Tell me what's going on," his face still buried in her soft and comforting bosom, holding her slightly trembling body, Asterion whispered in her ear, his voice full of gentleness, not at all like the usual cold boy. "You don't need to worry, Asti. As I said before, I'm not a weak woman, but your concern warms my heart, thank you." Narcissa held the boy's face and leaned her forehead against his, their noses touching as they locked eyes, exchanging seemingly cold glances, but behind their icy stares, genuine concern hid. Asterion was very upset with her words, she really didn't tell him what was worrying her. He huffed loudly to express his dissatisfaction and turned away, no longer wanting to look into her eyes. He had tried so hard to open up to this woman, but she had truly refused him. Narcissa showed a rare smile on her lips, seeing his reaction, and hugged him from behind, whispering boldly in his ear. "Asti, I realize that I love you. What should I do?" Asterion's body stiffened at her words, he didn't turn around but responded nonetheless. "That's natural, we are spiritual siblings." His response, with a double meaning, seemed to agree with her words. Narcissa kissed his hair and fell silent, savoring this moment, as she felt that in the future, it would be difficult to find time for something like this again. Translate by IA. Author's thoughts. What did you think of the relationship between Asterion and Narcissa? Personally, I liked what I wrote. Both of them have had their hearts wounded by society and the people around them. For some of you, this chapter may seem. Chapter 16, Chapter 14, Asterion e Narcissa, End Arc. On the grand canopy bed with black sheets, Asterion lay gazing up at the oak ceiling intricately carved with the coat of arms of House Black, a raven with outspread wings and red eyes. Ravens, in many civilizations, were messengers of death, believed to bring bad luck and a looming disaster if one was spotted. A symbol of death that Corvinus Black embraced with the crest of his family, quite fitting if you ask Asterion. With the sound of the closet door being closed, Asterion snapped out of his reverie. He glanced to the side and found Narcissa, wearing a black lace nightgown. The floral lace on the top didn't conceal her breasts at all, and the transparent bottom also revealed her black lace lingerie. Narcissa pulled back the comforter and climbed onto the bed, settling comfortably beside Asterion. She lay on her side, propping her elbow on the pillow and resting her head on her hand, looking at the still awake boy with a serene expression. "Can't sleep?" she asked, her cool voice bringing an odd comfort to Asterion. "Not exactly, just thinking about something," he replied, still keeping his gaze on the coat of arms of House Black on the oak ceiling of the canopy bed, looking somewhat puzzled about something. Narcissa nodded and brought his body closer to hers, placing his head against her chest, trying to provide comfort and help him think in silence. "What are you thinking?" Narcissa asked softly, stroking his soft, silky hair. "The plans of my predecessors," Asterion replied, breathing in the gentle scent of roses that Narcissa exuded. For some reason, the smell calmed him almost instantly. "Is it something very challenging?" Narcissa continued to inquire. "Difficult is an understatement, it's an insane plan that I've embraced like those before me. Sometimes, I wonder if I'm insane for agreeing to participate in such a plan." Asterion buried his head in the hollow between her breasts, his tone tinged with sarcasm. Kissing his forehead tenderly, Narcissa spoke in her cool voice, "Sanity is overrated, we're all insane in one way or another, we just hide our ugly side behind a mask we put on for others to see and find beautiful. I don't think you have an ugly side, but all right, I suppose I agree with your words." Asterion looked directly into her eyes and said, his gaze gradually becoming sleepy. He wasn't lying, to him, Narcissa or Arcturus had no ugly side. In his eyes, they seemed more genuine than anyone he had ever known in 2 lifetimes. "Asti, tomorrow we're going to Gringotts to carry out your inheritance test," she said, stroking his hair, keeping Asterion awake even longer. "Any problem with that?" Noticing the concern in her tone, Asterion asked, confused. "You have to prepare yourself for the looks and whispers you'll hear when you show up there," she said, her cold voice carrying a tone of concern. I've been used to receiving looks since I was little. Asterion really saw no reason for his cousin's concern. It wasn't normal for him to draw attention? I'm not talking about that kind of attention, Asti. She paused for a moment, looked at him, and continued speaking. Do you know how many Dark Lords have come from our family? Asterion shook his head, saying he didn't know. He rarely touched other books besides that insane plan, not that he didn't want to, but the book was so extensive that it made the Bible seem like a 10-page booklet. He estimated he had only read about 5% of the entire content, and often struggled to understand some of the advanced terms in the book. 7, that's the number our house has produced over more than 1,000 years. That means 7 people who possessed the same technique as you became Dark Lords. She paused to catch her breath and continued. Because of this, there are many legends about our family in the world. We're called by many names: demons, cold-hearted monsters without emotions, monsters in human skin, those who carry sin. They see us as a family that sold their own souls to Lucifer in exchange for power and forbidden knowledge. When they curse, they don't curse in the name of Morgana, but in the name of our ancestor. Asterion listened in silence and understood Narcissa's concern. She was worried that he would suffer from the hurtful words of others. Something he found cute, but completely unnecessary. The hatred of people towards him would only strengthen him even more. But, Asterion presumed that Narcissa had suffered quite a bit from the words of these trash people. I'm not made of glass, sissy. Asterion looked into her cold, blue eyes and spoke with a proud and confident look. I've learned that what people think of me doesn't affect me at all. They're just minor characters, unimportant in the story I'm creating. Asterion's words left Narcissa stunned for a moment, his voice still echoing in her mind, shaking her heart. It left her speechless. If she had had this courage since she was young, many things would have been different in her life. Sorry, I didn't realize you were already a strong and mature young man for your age. Narcissa sighed helplessly and spoke in a slightly regretful tone. That diminutive term isn't very pleasant to describe men, some may be quite offended. Though pleased with her words, Asterion didn't appreciate being called little. Narcissa's lips curved into an elegant arc, forming a beautiful smile as she responded by simply playfully stroking his hair. Asterion rolled his eyes and gradually closed them. Morpheus was calling him to his realm. Although he didn't know if infinity existed in this universe, since death did, there was no reason for other entities not to exist. Looking at his beautiful face so comfortable and defenseless, she knew Asterion trusted her to show his most vulnerable side. Narcissa kissed his forehead and realized she had never had such an intimate relationship with her own children, a sad fact, but not her fault. Lucius didn't let her raise their children, making the relationship between her and her children rigid. It seemed as though they were strangers instead of mother and children. Translate by IA. Thoughts of the author. We close this short arc. The next one is about Gringotts and the revelation of the Slytherin house lineage in the world once again. What did you think of this arc? Did it turn out well, or did you not like it? Tell me what you think. Chapter 17, Chapter 15, Gringotts. Upon hearing the doors of the hall open, Arcturus, who was absorbed in reading his newspaper, briefly looked up towards the entrance and blinked, surprised at the scene before him. Narcissa and Asterion entered the hall hand in hand. The old black patriarch wasn't surprised by the closeness between the two, they had grown very close over these 5 months. Instead, he was taken aback by the attire his great-grandson was wearing at that moment. Unlike his usual attire, which consisted of elegant suits or something more casual like black pants and white shirts, Asterion was wearing, at that moment, an elegant suit, but unlike his usual black color. The suit now displayed a dark green tone, with the black house crest strangely divided in half. The black raven was positioned on the right side of the upper part of the crest, leaving the lower part on the left side empty. It seemed that the young man had reserved a space for the possible crest of the noble house from his maternal lineage, something Arcturus doubted existed. The boy's mother was probably a muggle with whom Regulus had a brief encounter during one of his drunken nights. His grandson had a weakness for drink, especially when it involved good whiskey. Although the dark green color still raised many questions in his mind, as he looked into his grandson's ruby eyes, Arcturus noticed a clear spark of amusement dancing in those deep ruby eyes. For some reason, a strange feeling of caution sprang up in his heart. He couldn't pinpoint where that feeling came from, but he was certain that something extraordinary was about to happen, and his great-grandson was somehow involved. Good morning. I hope you both had a good night's sleep. Despite the caution he felt, Arcturus didn't let it show on his face. He greeted the two with his calm, deep voice, briefly holding his gaze on his great-grandson's face. The boy was plotting something, of that, he was sure. Perhaps sensing Arcturus' gaze upon him, Asterion returned the look and nodded, sitting next to Narcissa. His plan was just beginning, and he didn't want to expose anything prematurely. The memory of how he operated into the alley that day was still fresh in his mind, and today would be the day of his revenge. Yes, Asterion was someone who held grudges easily. He longed to see the legendary Arcturus Black lose his usual composure, yearning for the shock on the old patriarch's face upon discovering his maternal lineage. Just the thought of the image almost made his lips curve into a smile, but thankfully he managed to control himself and distractedly spread butter on his toast. Narcissa glanced at Asterion and then shifted her gaze to Arcturus. For some reason, both seemed to be plotting something or acting cautiously. The situation was extremely suspicious and unusual. Sensing the tense atmosphere hanging in the air, Narcissa tried to change it by introducing a new topic into the room. "Grandfather, I wanted to ask earlier, but where is Aunt Walburga's animated portrait? I haven't seen it anywhere since I arrived here." Arcturus paused from reading the newspaper for a moment and responded coldly, "Thanks to Merlin, long deceased, her portrait is rotting away somewhere in the basement." His voice carried a hint of venom when mentioning his late daughter-in-law and cousin, Walburga, wife of his son, Orion Black. Narcissa was not surprised by his words, nor by the contained animosity within them. She knew that Walburga and Arcturus had never been friends, in fact, they were practically enemies. As for the reason behind this animosity, it was mainly Walburga's extremist pure-blood ideology. Not that Arcturus wasn't a worthy example of a pure blood, but the old patriarch was more pragmatic and realistic. He didn't harbor hatred for Muggleborns, nor did he desire mass genocide in the name of equally insane ideals of a megalomaniac like Voldemort. "I think Asterion has the right to know his grandmother, after all, she was still Regulus's mother," said Narcissa cautiously, fearing to provoke Arcturus's wrath with her suggestion. Arcturus looked at Narcissa with a helpless gaze and then at his grandson, who observed him with a curious expression in his ruby eyes. "Kriaker," Arcturus uttered with his deep voice. At that moment, the house elf, named Kriaker, appeared next to the old patriarch, bowing constantly. "Kriaker heard your call, Lord Black." The elf's voice was old and raspy. "Go fetch Walburga's animated portrait from the basement," he ordered, still focused on reading his newspaper. "Your orders are a decree, Lord Black." "Kriaker will retrieve the portrait of the noble Lady Black." The house elf was more than happy to be tasked. He operated from the dining hall at extreme speed. About 40 seconds later, Kriaker returned carrying a large portrait made of black oak. Interestingly, the portrait depicted a woman wearing an elegant black aristocratic dress, with her hair styled in a sophisticated bun. It was Walburga Black. "Arcturus, you old dead, pure-blooded scum. If I ever leave this portrait, you're dead. I'll tear you apart like a mangy animal. I'll cut your dick off, you filthy bastard." The portrait moved as if it were alive. The first thing it did upon arriving in the hall was to curse the old patriarch in every possible way for long minutes without stopping once. Even Asterion was surprised by the amount of profanity uttered in less than a minute. Arcturus didn't even bother to look up and kept reading, ignoring the sharp and shrill screams of the woman. He wondered if the portrait would feel the pain of being burned alive if he set it on fire. He kept that idea ready to test it at some point in the future. While Walburga's portrait incessantly cursed Arcturus, the portrait of Walburga noticed other people in the dining hall, someone she knew especially well. After all, she raised her alongside her sister-in-law. "Narcissa, look at you, you've become as beautiful and elegant a woman as one would expect from a true Black." Walburga spoke in a tone completely different from when she cursed Arcturus. Although her tone was stern and serious. "It's been a while, Aunt," Narcissa greeted the woman who practically raised her. Even after death, Walburga still maintained the same tone. It seemed as if she hadn't even died, although she was merely a collection of memories. She rose from her chair and stood behind Asterion, placing her hands on the boy's shoulders. "But, Aunt, I want to introduce you to someone, more precisely, your grandson, son of Regulus." Walburga's body within the portrait came to a complete stop, her gaze falling upon the child whose shoulders Narcissa held. She looked into the boy's red eyes for a long time in silence, and when she finally spoke again, she shocked everyone in the hall. "Hello, my lovely grandson, look at you, you look like an adorable prince." Arcturus and Narcissa looked at the portrait in disbelief, wondering if they were hearing things, for it was impossible for Walburga Black to speak in such a kind and sweet tone. Truth be told, whether Arcturus or Narcissa, they felt a shiver run down their spines hearing the woman's sweet tone. "Hello, grandmother, I am Asterion Regulus Black, it's a pleasure to meet you." Asterion ignored the shocked looks from both and greeted his grandmother with much elegance and politeness. "Judging by your manners, Narcissa has done a good job in instructing you, keep learning from her, she was my masterpiece, my dear grandson." Walburga couldn't be happier at this moment, as she shouldn't, the legendary innate technique of the House of Black appeared in her lineage. Her soul, which is probably in hell, would be jumping for joy, along with all her ancestors. Author's thoughts, everyone's favorite portrait is back. This was an interesting chapter where we can see the interactions between the characters Arcturus and Walburga, as well as the reason for his animosity. Chapter 16, Gringotts, 2. "Have a little more cake, Asterion," Walburga inside the portrait spoke with a sweet and indulgent tone towards her grandson. Seeing Asterion being pampered at every moment by Walburga, Narcissa just huffed quietly. Now, she truly believed that all parents had favorite children or grandchildren. Her stern aunt, who raised her children as if they were in the military, now worried about every little thing regarding her dear grandson. Even worrying about the heat of the coffee for fear of hurting Asterion's tongue, and that, honestly, was starting to make her angry. The breakfast ended with Walburga urging Asterion to eat more, as he seemed too skinny, and she even blamed Arcturus for neglecting her precious grandson, calling him a dead old man and other insults. The old patriarch furrowed his brow deeply, probably restraining himself from setting fire to the animated portrait, regardless of how satisfying it would be to watch the painting burn with the flames of hell. Narcissa truly regretted saying anything earlier. If she had known this would happen, she would have stayed silent and never asked about her Aunt Walburga's portrait again. "Now that we're done, let's head to Diagon Alley," Arcturus said, rising from his chair. "You're taking Asterion to Diagon Alley?" Walburga inside the portrait asked, furrowing her brow. "Don't you know how ignorant those people can be? What if they hurt my precious grandson?" "Asterion is not weak, besides, Narcissa and I will be there," Arcturus replied coldly, not waiting for her response, and left the dining hall, tapping his cane on the floor, apparently venting on the poor tiles. "Humph!" Walburga huffed as the man left and focused entirely on Asterion. "My dear grandson, don't listen to anything those filthy muggleborns and half-breeds say. If possible, kill a few of them to clear the air a bit, they seem to smell like pigs in a sty." Asterion pursed his lips and refused to respond, listening to the genuine concern of his beloved yet very racist and extremist deceased grandmother. Outside the Black Manor, Arcturus touched the shoulders of Asterion and Narcissa. In an instant, the three vanished with a loud pop, similar to the backfiring of a car exhaust. During the process, Asterion felt a weight on his chest, his vision darkened, and his eyes darted in all directions while his organs seemed to move on their own inside his body. When Asterion felt the ground beneath his feet again, a familiar feeling of nausea and sickness made him feel unsteady, but he quickly recovered from these sensations and found himself standing in front of the entrance to a seemingly very dilapidated bar. If he didn't know better, he'd say it was a place in danger of collapsing at any moment. The Leaky Cauldron. Asterion presumed that all wizards had some fetish related to old things or were very reluctant to separate from the old world. He wouldn't stay in this place for even a minute, fearing he might catch the Black Plague from how old the place was. "What do you think?" Arcturus asked, looking at his great-grandson. "I think we should demolish the place and build something more hygienic and new," Asterion said, with a look of disgust as he glanced at the old wizarding pub. He knew the pub was the oldest in England, but since then, it seemed like the bar had been frozen in time. "You don't know how to appreciate it, Asterion. This place is history itself, with its nearly 4 centuries of existence. How many talented wizards like our ancestors have passed through here and entered the wizarding world?" Arcturus shook his head at his great-grandson's response and then gently stroked his hair. Asterion rolled his eyes and didn't hide the dislike he felt for the place. For someone who loved hygiene and cleanliness, this place was hell for him. Arcturus gave up trying to reason with him. He walked over to the ancient door, corroded by time and many termites. "Let's go, Asti." Taking his hand, Narcissa gently pulled him towards the entrance of the pub. As the 3 members of the House of Black entered the place, the entire atmosphere fell silent. The sound of someone swallowing was particularly audible in this silent environment. For the first time, Asterion truly felt what it meant to be a Black, a noble house that had produced many dark lords, in many cases, reigns of tyranny, terror, and fear. Fear was palpable in the air, the atmosphere completely silent, some even afraid to look at the three people, fearing some misfortune might befall them. Due to his innate technique, Asterion had a heightened sensitivity to negative magical energy, commonly generated from fear, anxiety, and terror that people emanated. He could feel the anxieties, fears, and even curiosity born from the horror stories they had heard from their dearest relatives. When Arcturus tapped his cane on the floor and walked towards the back of the bar, some of the more cowardly patrons nearly jumped out of their seats, while those closer to the entrance of Diagon Alley simply lowered their heads as the three members of the House of Black passed by them. Honestly, Asterion felt the whole situation was amusing, even overly exaggerated. It seemed like the entire British Wizarding Society had been influenced to fear them. If this was orchestrated by someone, Asterion had to applaud such genius, as it practically prevented any member of the House of Black from running for the position of British Minister for Magic. Although ironically, the House of Black still remained the leader of the purebloods in England, so regardless of any official position, they were still one of the most powerful families on the planet. So, what did you feel seeing the fear we caused in them? Before opening the passage that led directly to Diagon Alley, Arcturus turned to look at Asterion and asked in his usual deep and cold voice. Asterion pondered, recalling the faces of those men and women, remembering what he felt in that moment. He looked at the old black patriarch and replied in a cold tone. I felt good. Arcturus looked deeply at his great-grandson with his black eyes, slightly surprised by his response, and spoke coldly, then, remember that feeling, for it will be what you feel throughout your life, a life where everyone looks at you with fear and respect. Narcissa remained silent, listening to the entire conversation between them. She couldn't help but recall the first time she felt that way. Her mother, Druella, had asked her the same question, so she remembered what she felt that year. They made me feel like a monster, where everyone looked at me and recoiled in fear, Narcissa thought, looking at Asterion, who seemed completely normal. The two of them were fundamentally different. Welcome to Diagon Alley, Asterion. This is the beginning of your story in the wizarding world. Unaware of what his niece was thinking, Arcturus spoke as he opened the stone passage. Stone by stone, everyone began to retreat, gradually revealing a place completely different from the pub they were in. Diagon Alley. Author's thoughts: we've arrived at Diagon Alley, but I won't describe it because I think everyone reading this fanfic knows what Diagon Alley is like. Let me know in the comments what you think. Chapter 17, Gringotts, 3. Diagon Alley, the London of the British wizarding world, a place where all wizards and witches came to buy the necessities of daily life, have fun, or, if you were a student at Hogwarts, purchase your school supplies. At this moment, in this outdoor shopping area, it felt strangely silent. Only the sounds of footsteps hung in the air as the crowd of people parted, making way. Asterion, sandwiched between Arcturus and Narcissa, looked around at the people with curiosity. Whenever he looked at them, people automatically averted their gaze, afraid to meet his eyes. He had to admire how much fear his predecessors had instilled in this nation. If Voldemort was considered a demon, the House of Black was considered the very reincarnation of Satan on Earth. Well, it was no wonder, the House of Black produced 7 Dark Lords. Interestingly, he noticed that only those who were apparently Muggle-born seemed to be more afraid of them, which was completely normal given the infamy that his noble house carried. For fun, Asterion waved to the crowd, who recoiled in fear, causing his lips to curl into a rather amusing smile. I'll enjoy playing with this a few times, the boy murmured, earning a silent reprimanding look from Arcturus. Don't be childish, Asterion, Arcturus spoke in a low tone. They are just poor souls influenced by those in power. Still, it doesn't change the fact that they are afraid of a child, which is quite funny when you think about it, Asterion replied, innocently looking at his great-grandfather. Sometimes you forget that you are almost a semi-special grade wizard, your presence is quite intimidating, especially with the lovely dog at your heels. Consciously emitting a frightening aura to protect you, the old patriarch whispered, looking coldly at his great-grandson's shadow. Asterion nodded as he looked around at the various shops, each one more exotic than the last. Some were quite explicit for the current time of day. After all, who goes to a sex shop in the morning? He thought, observing an elderly man entering the adult store. By the way, why do we have to go to Gringotts? Wouldn't it be more logical to go to the ministry? Asterion asked. In his eyes, matters such as inheritances should be dealt with at the ministry. Because by acknowledging your inheritance at Gringotts, you can formally inherit the vaults of the House of Black. After the inheritance test is completed, we will send the necessary documents to the Ministry, which will recognize it as legitimate, making you officially the heir of the House of Black, Narcissa responded in place of Arcturus. We give too much power to a race that isn't even human, Asterion grumbled. What is the foundation of a civilization, Asterion? Narcissa took the opportunity to give him another lesson in politics. Interests, people gather in a country for their own interests. You wouldn't stay in a country where you can't meet your basic needs, of course, assuming you can leave that country, Asterion replied after thinking for a brief moment. Very well, you must remember that our world is not just ours, dozens of other intelligent races walk the face of the earth like us. We share some of our interests to avoid a bigger problem, Narcissa whispered, explaining how the world was a vast network of interests, involving not only the human race but other races as well. Wars are the least of our problems, the worst ones are social, economic, and political. Once one of the three is broken, our society will face even greater problems, such as the collapse of our economy or the exposure of our existence, spreading fear and further increasing the emergence of cursed spirits and their power. I understand, we sacrifice some of our rights for the greater good, Asterion muttered to himself, thinking about how complicated the world was when viewed politically. Then, he thought of something, looked at Arcturus, and asked, I presume my interests are already being discussed. Yes, Narcissa and I are making a meticulous plan for your future in the Ministry of Magic, when you assume the Black Throne in the Wizengamot, Arcturus nodded and replied without hiding anything. Asterion didn't ask and didn't care, the idea of spending his days in an office didn't appeal to him. He preferred to receive a position as an auror and go on missions outside. The three walked to Gringotts, a huge white building made of marble, quite majestic. At the entrance of the building, two goblins stood immovably guarding the massive doors. Both goblins had wands in holsters on their arms. Suddenly, Arcturus's steps halted, and consequently, those of Asterion and Narcissa. Both looked confusedly at the old patriarch. They were about to enter Gringotts, why did they stop? Looking in the direction Arcturus was gazing, Asterion saw two tall figures. One was an elderly woman with an unattractive hat, but tall and slim. Next to her stood a boy around 16 years old, tall and muscular, with black hair and blue eyes. Someone Arcturus knew? Perhaps an old lover? Asterion thought as he prepared to watch the show. The expression on the elderly woman's face changed from indifference to coldness, with a faint murderous intent hidden in her gaze, upon seeing Arcturus. Matriarch Longbottom, Arcturus greeted the woman politely. Lord Black, the woman responded. Asterion finally understood who the elderly woman was. So, the person beside her was Neville? Looking at the tall, muscular boy in front of him, Asterion couldn't believe this was Neville Longbottom. Hey? Asterion frowned when he noticed something unusual about Neville. He couldn't sense any emotions from him, it was as if he didn't have any. He was empty and cold. However, it was then that Asterion realized he could sense people's emotions based on the magical energy they emanated, but from Neville, he couldn't sense anything. This could only mean one thing, Neville had no magical energy. Celestial restriction? So, you're the Toji of this world, Neville Longbottom. Chapter 20, Chapter 18, Gringotts, 4. It's been some time, Lady Augusta, Arcturus remarked, looking at the woman with indifference, his gaze cold and piercing. Arcturus's body was tense, ready to react to any attack, which he had no doubt would come at any moment, given how emotional the woman in front of him was. Like any ancestor of the 72 noble houses that founded the Wizengamot, House Longbottom descended from a powerful class special wizard Charles Longbottom. The innate technique of House Longbottom was called alteration of inanimate objects. Fundamentally, the technique consisted of increasing and decreasing the weight and height of inanimate objects. Charles Longbottom's greatest achievement was altering the weight and height of dust particles, essentially creating an extremely destructive meteor shower. Certainly, apart from Charles, no other member of House Longbottom reached that level, but Arcturus dared not underestimate this woman. Not enough time to destroy your cursed family, Arcturus Black, replied the elderly woman, showing no trace of weakness. When the woman mentioned the name Black, the young man whom Asterion presumed to be Neville clenched his fists, his face turned pale, anger palpable on his features. Arcturus seemed to have heard a very amusing joke. Time? Is that what you count on to destroy my house? The sarcasm in the old patriarch's tone made the matriarch grit her teeth in anger. So, Arcturus looked at the young man beside Augusta Longbottom. Is this your grandson? I've heard about him, certainly a strong lad. Upon hearing this, whether it was Neville or Augusta, they both displayed a very displeased expression. What Arcturus said could be considered a compliment on any other occasion or for another person, but for Neville, it was an insult. A very subtle insult if you didn't know about his condition. Something that the person in front of him would surely know, yet still, he insulted him. Arcturus wasn't a man to make enemies everywhere, he would never stoop to insulting a young man. But when he was facing an enemy, like House Longbottom, it was a different matter. He wouldn't show mercy to his enemies. Especially towards Augusta Longbottom, who voted in favor of the execution of his great-niece, Bellatrix Lestrange, born black. Did she have reasons to vote in favor? Yes, she did. After all, Bellatrix and her husband, Rodolphus Lestrange, tortured her son and daughter-in-law, Frank and Alice Longbottom, using the Cruciatus curse, Crucio. But did Arcturus care? The answer was, no. Augusta had reasons to kill, he had reasons to protect. Regardless of what Bellatrix had done, he would protect her as he protected her. At least, my grandson doesn't look like a delicate girl, Augusta retorted, looking at Asterion beside Narcissa, her voice cold and sarcastic. Though she didn't know who he was, she presumed he was his grandson upon seeing the boy's cursed red eyes. Asterion, who had been observing the exchange of insults with joy, was stunned by the sudden insult directed at him, if you consider her words an insult at all. Yes, he admits he has refined, even delicate facial features, but Asterion didn't dislike it, in fact, he quite liked his appearance. It made anyone easily lower their guard against him. As his great-grandson, Arcturus showed no anger, even letting out a low laugh. Well, Asterion certainly won't have any trouble finding a marriage. Arcturus's words seemed normal, but beyond praising his great-grandson, they cruelly attacked Neville. In British wizarding society, those who had wizard parents but lacked magical energy were scorned as squibs. This was not solely due to the wizard's sense of superiority over muggles but also a social characteristic of England. If you were the heir of a noble house, to inherit your noble seat in the Wizengamot, the supreme wizarding parliament, there were two requirements to fulfill. First, you had to have the lineage in question, and second, you should inherit the innate technique or the simplified technique of the noble house in question. Neville fulfilled the first requirement but not the second, as he lacked magical energy. The celestial vow exchanged all his magical energy for superhuman strength and senses, meaning Neville could feel cursed spirits but could not see them. Neville, for not inheriting the innate technique of House Longbottom, also could not inherit the Longbottom throne. Therefore, since Augusta was too old to have another child and Neville could not inherit the Longbottom throne, the main branch of House Longbottom was considered extinct up to this point. Neville practically became a laughingstock throughout wizarding society, scorned and humiliated on almost every occasion he attended. As for marriage, no woman from a noble house would consider Neville as a potential marriage partner. After all, marriages in the nobility were not based on love but rather on political power, something Neville did not possess. In other words, Neville had to marry a half-blood or muggle-born, something that would further lower his status in the purest blood society that was England. Arcturus was a master at hiding his own emotions, but Augusta certainly was not. The words of the Black Patriarch left the Longbottom matriarch full of anger, something that easily transpired on her face. Arcturus's words cruelly pierced the fragile heart of the 10-year-old boy, causing his nails to pierce his palms, blood dripping between his tightly clenched fingers. Narcissa, who didn't like Augusta involving Asterion in their disputes, took a book from her bag and made it float with her magical energy until it landed at Neville's feet. Here, take this book, it will help you in your glorious future. On the cover of the book was written the basics of magical energy manipulation. Asterion almost laughed seeing the title of the book. Narcissa was truly cruel, but he liked that side of her very much. If the fire had already begun to burn between Arcturus and Augusta, Narcissa poured gasoline on the flames, causing the furious fire to explode. The moment she read the title of the book, Augusta's magical energy violently erupted from her body, like dark blue smoke burning like furious flames. She drew her wand and pointed it at Narcissa, who remained unmoved by the attack. Tiny objects from the sleeve of Augusta's blouse aligned themselves above her, appearing to be very small needles. In the next instant, the needles expanded, growing to an incredible 20 meters in length. The gigantic needles sliced through the air at great speed, heading towards the three members of House Black. Arcturus merely coldly snorted and also utilized his simplified innate technique. A curtain of darkness unfolded behind him, and a colossal skeletal hand emerged from the darkness, swatting the huge needles aside. Violent whines spread in all directions, causing screams of surprise and fear. A massive amount of negative magical energy spread throughout Diagon Alley, causing numerous people who had never seen a semi-special grade cursed spirit to feel as if they were facing an evil demon. The malice and terror emanating from the cursed creature made everyone tremble with fear and helplessness. "Let's play, Augusta, it's been a while since I've seen blood," Arcturus said, emanating an aura shrouded in malice and murderous intent, the air around him feeling so heavy that it was difficult to even breathe. The people watching the spectacle between Arcturus and Augusta began to retreat, running far away. The black curtain behind Arcturus expanded rapidly, and the enormous cursed spirit finally emerged from the curtain, revealing its appearance to the world. It was a massive black skeleton hundreds of meters tall. Its colossal height instilled fear and terror in all who beheld it. It was no wonder a monster hundreds of meters tall could haunt anyone's nightmares for a long time.
Thanks for listening.